stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing while Councilman Sarah leads us in prayer.
Almighty God, give us the compassion to listen to the needs of others. Instill in our minds the confidence and courage we need to best serve our community, and help us always to act with honor and respect for our community and for our fellow members. Amen.
I ask you to remain standing for a moment of silence. We recently lost one of Brigantine's long-standing residents, a matriarch of a family that's been very involved in Brigantine for many, many years, with two sons serving. One is a police officer in the city of Brigantine, and both sons serving as police officers in the city of Brigantine, and one son serving as a member of the Board of Education. And I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for Mrs. Doran. Thank you. This to advise that meeting notices covering this meeting have been sent and posted as required under the Open Public Meetings Act. Before we begin the formal agenda, received some good news this week from our city manager, and I'm going to say that this is incremental good news because it could even get better. As you know, we embarked on a quest to come into compliance with the new community rating system and to work to improve our rating system going forward under a new set of procedures that have been established. Ed Stinson was given that task as our city engineer at the time, and I'm happy to report that the first indication is that our community rating system will be reduced. The number will be reduced from a 6 to a 5, which is a tremendous savings for all the taxpayers of the city of Brigantine. And I'll let Ed describe the numbers. But also, there's a possibility that we could become, I think, the first municipality in the state of New Jersey, if everything works out well, and possibly one in this region, a pretty significant region, to achieve a 4, which would result in even greater savings on flood insurance rates for people of Brigantine. And we're talking savings that are over $1 million, $1.2 million for homeowners. So I want to thank Ed Stinson for the work that he's done. It was a daunting task, and one that took a lot of persistence to be able to achieve the rating of 5, and we're hoping to go even lower to a 4 if it doesn't happen this year or possibly in the future. I want to thank him for the great job that he's done saving the taxpayers a significant amount of money. Ed, do you want to describe what those numbers might look like?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to first start by, there were a lot of players in this project to get us recertified and get us hopefully certainly the class 5 and hopefully looking towards the class 4. So when we get the official notice from FEMA, I'd like to at that time name everybody, but we had the construction office heavily involved, emergency management heavily involved, public works heavily involved. We had a board of volunteers that helped us create our program for public information, which scored us an awful lot of points. So there are many, many people that helped in this whole process. So I wasn't really expecting at this time to talk about that. So when we get the formal notice, I'd like to at that time, bring up everybody, or at least have everybody by name so we can all thank them for their work. But the situation is we are audited every 5 years for our community rating service. That has to do with our flood insurance, and it reflects the work that Brigantine does for flood protection. It reflects the work that our construction office does in enforcing regulations that are in place for flood protection. So we were a Class 6, which is a very good rating, and that provides a 20% discount on all of our flood insurance policies. So that's currently where we are, and that 20% represents about $1.2 million that residents and the city alike save on our flood insurance premiums. The Class 5 rating will increase that discount from 20% to 25%, so roughly another $300,000 to $400,000 that we will save in premiums. And the Class 4, which the way it works right now is we have enough points to be a Class 5. We are within striking distance to be a Class 4. So FEMA has given us the opportunity to do some additional work that will get us to that Class 4, or that could get us to that Class 4. That class, if we get certified as a Class 4, we will be the first in the state, and I believe the first east of the Mississippi to have that rating, and it would represent a 30% discount on our flood insurance premiums, which would be in the neighborhood of, we'd be closing in on about $2 million discounts citywide. So that we're not there yet. That's a goal. It apparently is a realistic goal at this point. I just received the email. I think I forwarded it out to mayor and council. I just got the email on Monday, so it is very exciting news. But I'll end it with this. There were a lot of players that were part of this reevaluation process for the CRS, and there's a lot of credit to go around, but we're very excited about it.
Ed, just a clarification. You say it's 25%, the city as a whole. Does that actually translate to an individual policy or a reduction on each person's policy by 25%?
That is correct. So when we get, right now we have a 20% discount. So if you look at your flood insurance policy, it'll say CRS rating 6, 20% discount, and you'll see that discount. When we get certified at a 5, which we scored the points, we will get, we don't have that right now. So once that happens, we'll get to 25%. What we're working on is how quickly we could do the additional work that gets us to the 4, and do we do that now and wait to get to 4, or do we take the 5 and then over the next 6 months or so do the work to get to the 4?
The work on the watershed, does that push us to a 4? From a
That-
6 to a
that's-
5 or a 5 to a 4?
That would be the 5 to the 4, the master plan for the
Watershed map.
watershed. That's correct. Yes.
But I thought we could use some good news. And I want to thank Ed for his efforts, and
Everybody else.
and everyone else involved with you, Ed. Thank you. Okay, the first order of business is the approval of the council meeting minutes of 9/3/14 and the executive session minutes of 2/18/15. A motion and second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any additions or deletions to the minutes? Seeing none, can we have roll call, please?
View, I have to abstain from the 9-3, but I approve the 2-18. Clay?
Yes.
Picardi?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Sarah?
Abstain on 9/3/14, and yes to 2/18/15.
Simpson?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Next is approval of the requisition list, operating expenses, and payroll. Have a motion and second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question. On the bill list, there's 3, I guess, bills to Vital Communications for January, February, and December. I know Vital Communications is the company that did the reeval for the city. What are those bills for?
Vital also, we have a yearly contract with them for the maintenance of our software in the tax assessor's office. So that maintenance contract is the $325 that you see. So,
Okay.
so those bills are for the
Yeah.
software.
That'd be ongoing?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on the bill list? Okay, seeing none, could we have roll call, please?
View? Yes. Clay?
Yes.
Bacardi?
Yes.
DeLucre?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Simpson?
Yes.
Mayor Gunther?
Yes.
Motion carried.
As we always do, and I skipped over 4, we have the solicitor comment on the topics that were discussed in executive session. So Fred, if you could give the public an update on the topics that were discussed.
In executive session, the city council discussed 1 matter dealing with personnel and 2 matters dealing with potential contracts. The personnel matter was largely a salary discussion. Additional information in regard to that discussion will be made available to the public this evening when city council considers ordinance number 2 of 2015. One of the contract matters deals with a potential land sale to a public utility. Council has shared their thoughts with the manager, who will undertake additional negotiations. Additional information will be made available to the public when those negotiations are concluded, which is anticipated to be in approximately 30 to 60 days. The other contract matter deals with contracts relating to the sale of ice cream on Brigantine beaches. Additional information will be made available to the public in that regard when City Council considers ordinance number 3 this evening. Mayor, in that regard, I would make the point that the discussion in executive session in part focused on Section 61 of the draft that has been provided to the council and public. In that draft, reference in Section 61 speaks about a zone being established that starts at 7th Street South. As a practical matter, that's a typographical error or an error that was caught by the members of council. So that will now read that the zone will start at 8th Street South. So when that document is introduced, that should be considered 8th Street South, not 7th Street South.
Thank you, Mr. Cerny. Okay, at this time, we will have public comment on agenda items only. I want to remind the public that we will have a golf course management contract presentation, discussion, and public comment. So there will be public comment included on the golf course contract that will take place as a separate public comment. So if anyone would like to address anything that is on the agenda other than the golf course contract, please step forward, use the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Yes, Mrs. Phillips.
Actually, okay. Ann H. Phillips, 308 27th Street. Actually, there are 3 items here that pertain to the golf course, but they need to be spoken before the actual discussion on the golf course takes place. So if I may,
Sure, Mrs. Phillips.
proceed with that, please. Okay, I'm speaking for the Brigantine Taxpayers Association, and we have 3 items. 1, some on council are proposing to create a nonprofit entity for an existing city-owned commercial enterprise with a line of credit from an unidentified source. Such a creation and possible use of public funds might have legal problems. We urge council to determine if such actions are legal under state law and present such a finding to the public. 2, on the agenda, a vote on the lease proposal is scheduled immediately after public comment on this issue. Such unseemly haste and lack of time for weighing and understanding all the parts of this very important matter are unjustified, unfair to the taxpayers and council members, and unnecessary. This is especially true since a new solution to this problem, a non-profit entity, with all of its complications and questions, is being presented to the taxpayers for the first time tonight. We urge council to reschedule the vote for its next meeting in the public interest. To do otherwise would really be outrageous. 3, the factors guiding such an important vote shall be facts and figures. not personal experiences and desires, and certainly not partisan politics. This is an economic issue affecting the financial future excuse me, and development of this community and our property taxes. A thorough, objective discussion based on these issues is the most productive use of our time and is the way to a positive conclusion benefiting all taxpayers on the short and long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Phillips. Any other public comment on agenda items? Yes, Mr. Pucci.
John Pucci, 100 Sheridan Square. Good evening, Mayor
Good evening.
and City Council. I think it's worth mentioning again the efforts for the community rating system to be lowered. I attended several of those meetings at the community center the past year or two, and I know many city officials, especially the city engineer at the time, attended those. I saw the work that was done. I know it was extensive, and the results that was stated tonight are from all that work being done, and it's savings to the residents of Brigantine. So I just absolutely, I commend Mr. Stinson for all the work that he's done and everybody else that has worked with him to lower my flood insurance rates. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 10, when you get to the introduction of the ordinance, amending the salary ordinance, surely, not that it's not going to be done, but the difference is the changes that are going to be made, that they be mentioned. And also number 11, the ice cream ordinance. Could you specifically state what is needed for a veteran to obtain that license? I know there is a paragraph in that ordinance concerning the veterans, but just specifically state the needs for veterans to obtain that license. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, any other public comment on agenda items? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move to number 8, the golf course management presentation, discussion, and public comment. I see Mr. Glavin is here, who was the city's consultant in developing the RFP that went forward. I guess at this point I'd invite you up to join in the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Are there any specific questions, or would you like me to provide an overview of the whole process?
Yeah, why don't you provide an overview of the process and how we arrived at this point?
Sure. First, my name is Matthew Galvin. I'm the president of a company called Morningstar Golf and Hospitality based in Princeton. For about 25 years, I've been active in the golf industry as an owner, operator, and as a consultant, and based here in New Jersey. Within the consulting practice, we have a specialty in assisting local and state governments bid out their golf courses where they've sought to privatize them, including the courses for the city of Wilmington, Delaware, the state of Delaware, some cities in Connecticut, and here in Brigantine. We were contacted last summer of 2014, by the City Council looking to explore ways to potentially privatize the Brigantine Golf Links golf course, with the goal of shifting the day-to-day risk of owning and operating a golf course to a third-party operator who would be willing to lease it on a long-term basis and pay rent to the city, and therefore, whether it rains or shines, or whether health insurance rates go up or down, the day-to-day operating risk would rest with the operator, and the city would have a somewhat predictable stream of rent, rain or shine, so to speak. And this is not an uncommon structure. This is employed by the City of New York, by cities and states across the country, and it's not uncommon, although in New Jersey there's some nuances where you have to be careful due to courses that were funded with tax-free bond financing. That imposes some limitations on what you're able to do, especially a timeline. It limits the number of years potentially that you can offer. We put together an RFP that, in my opinion, is a good balance between being fair to an operator to attract the most potential interested parties and also safeguarding the city from downside risk if the market was soft or if competition was excessively challenging. And we advertised it starting in July of 2014 to approximately 500 golf courses and golf company operators, within New Jersey, regionally and nationally. We received 8 attendees at the mandatory pre-bid meeting, and we had a mandatory meeting so we could better track who showed up in case there had to be any subsequent communication with them. And out of those 8 attendees, we received 2 bids, one from Billy Casper Golf Management out of Vienna, Virginia, which is one of the nation's largest operators of golf courses, and for a while used to manage the Egg Harbor Township's course and have some other ones in the state of New Jersey. And the second bid being from the Ron Jaworski Golf Company, which, as most people know, own and operate several courses in southern New Jersey, including the closest one, Blue Heron Pines, which actually my company used to own from 2005 to 2007. So we have familiarity with that. Interestingly, I contacted these 6 groups that attended the pre-bid but chose not to submit a proposal to try to ascertain why they backed out. And as you might recall, summer of 2014, you couldn't open up a paper without seeing another article about a casino shutting down. And almost uniformly, all of the other 6 parties were concerned about the viability and the kind of the macroeconomic pressures in the Brigantine and Atlantic City market and chose not to bid for that reason. Brigantine is viewed not so much as a course that will attract gamblers, but a course that supports local play from the local employed base, and they were concerned about the job losses tied to the casino market. So that was the bulk of the reason why the other 6 firms chose not to bid. Out of the 2 bids we received, Billy Casper's was non-conforming. It was not a lease. They proposed putting in, I believe, $250,000 in capital improvements into the property, but in return they wanted a longer-term contract to manage the property, I believe, at $10,000 a month. So they're willing to put some money in, but they're getting all of it back and over time. But more importantly, they did not transfer any of the day-to-day operating risk to themselves. If the property made money, it'd be great for the city. If it lost money, that'd be the city's obligation. The Jaworski Group did put in a lease proposal. I believe everybody has a summary of it here, but essentially it had 0 rent the first couple of years, $50,000 for the next year or 2, and then going up to $100,000 for the remainder of the term. It was not overwhelming. It did not provide any escalations. It did not include any kind of CPI adjustment. So for a long-term proposition, it was not totally attractive that way. It did isolate the risk if there was downside, and having been in this business for more than a couple of decades, you never have 5 years where the numbers keep going up or keep going flat, or you never can count on what you're going to get necessarily. We're weather dependent. So they would have assumed operating risk. Certainly there were details that had not been finalized with the Jaworski Group on how you'd verify capital that they would put into the property and so forth. But the discussions never got that far because there was never an indication that the City Council would accept the overall framework of the deal than to move into the more minutia. So as it stands, the Jaworski Group still has their, unless there's a late development, my understanding is they still have their proposal on the table and their bid deposit with the city, and they've not withdrawn their bid, but that's the latest. They've not communicated with me recently. And I think they believe basically that the ball's in the city's court, so they're waiting for a response. So that is the process in a nutshell, where we are today. And it was not an overwhelming response. As I've mentioned to the City Council once before, if the city wanted to re-offer this, my firm would offer its services free of charge for the second time around, if you want to pursue that option. But this is where we are today.
And Matt, also, if we can make it clear for the record, the Jaworski proposal included taking over the food and beverage operation completely for the numbers that are in this proposal. So
Correct.
the Jaworski operation would own all of the profit or loss with the food and beverage operation as well.
Yes, and the capital that they, and one of the, as it was communicated to me, one of the objectives of this RFP was stemming from the city's completion of a master plan identifying capital needed for the course for the next generation. And it was significant, it got into the 7 figures plus, and part of the objective through the RFP was to find a third party who would be willing to take the financial burden and make some of those capital improvements. They had proposed money over the lifetime of the lease, as you all have in your proposal. Now that is just to be clear to them, to be fair to them, that was their minimum requirement. They certainly could make more than that, but we asked for what their minimum requirement was, which they put in there, in which they had identified primarily irrigation and drainage as their primary targets of improvement.
Okay. Any questions from members of council on the Jaworski proposal?
Could I get some information from you about Ron Jaworski Golf in general? You said he owns and operates 4 courses right now?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Out of the 4, which are the 2 he owns, or which ones does he own?
I know he owns Blue Heron Pines and the one in Vineland, used to be called Running Deer. I don't know if it still is.
Yeah.
And Running Deer. And I'm not sure if the other ones are leased or owned outright.
Okay, so you're not sure?
I'm not sure on those
Because my
other
next
two.
question was going to be, on the golf courses that he leases and operates, what was the terms of those agreements, if you had any information on that?
We don't have information on that. We were able to obtain copies of leases on courses owned by the state of New Jersey that are leased out to third parties. And we were looking, and we had shared that with the city's attorney, looking for standard lease language, not necessarily the same economics, because every property is different.
Well, maybe someone else later. If you know the answer to the question when you come up to the mic, maybe you can pass that information along to me. Now, improvements, capital improvements, you mean major improvements when you say capital improvements.
Correct.
As a operator of a golf course and you're investing money and you want to make a profit, you invest more money in a golf course in addition to capital improvements. Is that correct?
Correct. They're the day-to-day operating expenses, which in some cases include your maintenance of the greens and fairways and cart paths. But what I typically will define as a capital improvement, in some ways for tax purposes, which don't apply to the city, but essentially an improvement that's more than $1,000 and will last more than a year. So if I buy a new oven, or if I buy a new golf cart, or if I'm putting in $10,000 worth of irrigation heads, that would be a capital improvement. And it's not uncommon in the industry to spend between, say, 2 and 4% of gross revenues a year on required capital improvements that go back in. In many cases, just to keep you at the normal level of operation, not necessarily improving you, but staying steady. And so that's a recurring benchmark that I use. What the city, my understanding was the city wanted to replace an aging infrastructure of irrigation and cart paths and drainage issues and certain things that were identified through the master plan. And so that was what we had asked. We shared the master plan with all the bidders and asked them to speak to it specifically with their plans of where they would spend the money.
So his proposal of a minimum of 300,000 capital improvements is close to that average percentage?
Well, that's in the
what's
first 5 years.
in the first 5 years?
And that's the minimum. And then he had obligations for
Additional
remaining,
capital
yes.
improvements for the remainder of the lease. As far as marketing, advertising, small improvements, joining associations meetings, that has nothing to do with, those are normal expenses
day-to-day
that
operating
he would
expenses, yeah.
invest in the golf course.
Well, I don't know if I'd use the term invest, so the day-to-day
Day-to-day
obligations, yeah.
operation. Mhm.
Is there any way to quantify the purchasing power and marketing power that someone like Jaworski coming in, or him in particular, would have over, say, a standalone?
I don't know if you can quantify it, but there's certainly value. And the fact that he has a network of courses locally where you could sell memberships to all properties, where you could have one membership that would give you access to all the properties, that certainly has value. There are cost savings by having
layered management where you could share between properties, either sharing equipment, sharing marketing efforts and dollars. For example, if he's taking out an ad in the local paper, you could take him out for multiple properties instead of just one. And that speaks to an interesting point. When we were negotiating with him and trying to push them to increase their rent, especially some percentage rent, so we would have growth opportunities going forward, they resisted that because by joint marketing this course with their other properties, you could potentially have a situation where somebody pays one fee that you have to allocate among multiple properties, and they didn't want to have any appearance that they were taking revenue somewhere else that is attributable to Brigantine. They didn't want any improper appearance of mingling those dollars as you market the properties all together. So that's why they did not propose a percentage rent. But to answer your question, there certainly is value to that. In fact, if you go back, I don't even know how many years it is, when Meadowbrook first got involved and was managing the course, they used to have 6 courses in Philadelphia, and the idea was that they could cross-market and drive some of that business to the shore. And I don't know if that materialized or not. They no longer have those courses. But there certainly is benefit to cross-marketing properties. Here in New Jersey, we have a property in central New Jersey, and for a while we leased one 20 minutes away, and we marketed both together, and there was certainly a noticeable increase in doing so. So that is a viable business plan.
When he does his celebrity events, does he kind of spread them evenly among all his properties, or does he tend to, like, just say, I know the next one I think is at Blue Heron Pines.
Mhm.
Is that where he does them, period, or does he move around with them?
I can't speak to his charity events. I do know that he's active in each of his properties when it's not football season.
Mr. Galvin, what sort of reputation does Ron Jaworski Golf have within the industry?
They have a very good reputation. One of the things and one of the obligations of my company through this process would be to perform due diligence on the companies that bid to make sure they had the essential met the criteria and had the qualities that could successfully complete their duties. And they passed with flying colors in all areas. They're well regarded by their customers. They pay their bills. They do a fairly decent job in everything they do. The company is actively managed by Liz Jaworski and their son BJ, and they're active in the industry and have a good reputation.
In relationship to the people who never came to the table, where does Jaworski stand? Is he kind of mid-tier, low-tier, first-tier, second? You know what I mean?
He's significantly smaller than Billy Casper Golf, which did put in a non-conforming bid. And that could be either a good thing or a bad thing. You might view it as a company with fewer resources, or you might view it as a company where you have the ownership involvement hands-on, and it's not just one of 150 that they have across the country. And so you can view that 2 different ways. And we did not get into a level of due diligence on the people that did not bid, but just through local reputation, he would be in the higher end of that.
How many properties does he?
I believe
manage?
4.
Matt, I know that you and Mr. Cerny tried to have additional conversations about what would fall into the category of capital.
Mm-hmm.
As indicated on the proposal, we're looking at a minimum over 15 years of $700,000. And as you said, 2% to 4% of revenue would be used in a normal operation to invest back in to keep the course running. We look at that number, that isn't much. In fact, it probably falls within that category that would be allowable. So the not being able to define what capital improvements and how that money would be allocated is troubling in some regards, because as you mentioned, it could be an oven in the clubhouse, or it could be something to do with the irrigation system. And I'm also curious about, when you look at the structure of this lease, and is it unusual that, knowing that the city has a debt service payment of $400,000 a year, that for the first 2 years there is 0 income back to the city from the Jaworski Group, so that the taxpayers would have a $400,000 payment, but Mr. Jaworski would not have a payment to the city of Brigantine. So there's no revenue within those first 2 years. Is that an unusual structure for a lease like this?
No, it's not unusual, primarily because the debt service that the city has is really its own business on how it structured its debt. If you have a city that has no debt at all, it doesn't affect how much rent you get or don't get. If you have a city, if you re-amortize the debt and refinanced it out for another 20 years and your payment was $20,000 a year, $50,000 a year, that's almost irrespective of the operation. So the idea is to obtain the most aggressive bid you can get, responsible aggressive bid you can get, without really skewing it up or down by what the city's obligations are. Especially if that's mostly, if the debt service is mostly a principal payment, not an interest payment, you're building equity in it, I guess you could argue that. So that's not unusual. In many cases, I'd say a lot of the places where you see leases, New York City does it exclusively. I don't believe they have debt on their properties at all. They've had them long enough and so forth. So usually the debt issue is only more common on the newer properties that were either acquired recently or built recently.
So it's not something that the respondent takes into consideration, but certainly something that
you have to.
the city has to look at when structuring.
And on the capital part, to be fair to them, I'd argue that what they've proposed is their minimum commitment, and certainly as an owner-operator or as a lessee-operator, they're driven by the market forces to make sure customers want to come back. So if something needs to be fixed, if a green needs to be redone, or a car path needs to be fixed so you don't lose your dentures going down the path, certainly they have the profit motive to make sure it's done. And that's one of the benefits of a lease. You have people that have the risk on the other side and the reward if they attract people and bring them back.
But Matt, to be fair, you really don't know that.
I don't know.
Mr. Jaworski hasn't returned an email or phone call in probably over a month to ask to find out what the $300,000 included. He will not negotiate with us anymore.
Well,
so if we don't know what the $300,000 includes, it could be telephones, it could be POS, and that's what Mr. Casper does with his other courses when I read his lease. So to be fair for everybody, for this council and everybody out there, we really don't know what the $300,000 represents that he's going to put into the course.
They just earmarked it for irrigation and drainage is what they put in their proposal. But I communicated with them and indicated the city's interest in getting into the finer details of not only the capital, but how it'd be verified. And especially if you're putting a pipe underground, how do you verify if it's there?
Right.
And it's doable. Banks do it all the time when they oversee construction loans and so forth.
Sure.
So we tried to get into that level of detail with them. They did not want to respond until they had an understanding or comfort level that the city was accepting or open to the overall part of their proposal. So
Now,
that's what I was led to believe.
The issue of taxes has come up, and at this point, I believe, the valuation for the golf course is at $6 million. That seems, I mean, it's never been challenged.
Yeah.
Does that seem reasonable to you as a professional, or should?
Well, I'm not an appraiser, but having been an owner that has appealed taxes on my own properties and being familiar with what courses sell for, I would argue that it would be between $1 and $1.5 million, so significantly lower than where it is now.
So the city could appeal the valuation and have those taxes drop significantly?
Correct. Courses nowadays are selling for about 1 times revenue, courses of this type, and
1 times revenue?
correct. And right now, Harbor Pines is on the market for approximately that amount. You have other properties in New Jersey on the market right now for about that. So it's a good metric if something's been losing money or if it's been owned by a not-for-profit. You can look at the revenue level as in a multiple. But certainly I think the city has the opportunity to reduce the taxes significantly with an appeal.
So Harbor Pines is for sale, and the sale price is 1% of revenue?
No, it's approximately 1 times revenue.
Oh, 1 times revenue, okay. Do you know what that is for Harbor Pines?
Approximately $3 million,
Harbor Pines is for sale for $3 million?
approximately.
Okay, one other question about rounds of golf. Last year was a pretty good golf weather-wise for golf. Your course, you own a golf course. How many rounds of golf?
They
Would
vary.
a-
Some of my clubs are private, some are public, but last year was weather-wise, was probably one of the better years in the last 3 or 4. We did not have any unusual events.
Uh-huh.
It was,
So did you do 40,000 rounds of golf?
every course is different. Further.
Average?
Well, I'd probably say, again, my 2 in New Jersey are private, so they don't affect it. A course in New York, that public course was about, but it's further away from the city, was about 35,000. So,
Are there any indications that the golf industry is about to level off, or it's going to get better revenues, or worse, or nationally, I mean,
well, nationally, it's
or even
flat.
here? Uh-huh.
And, but you really can't look nationally. Golf is a local business, and Brigantine draws most of its business from the island and then a little bit off the island. It's a local course, so you really have to look locally, and it's a very difficult market locally. I view the upside of Brigantine essentially floating and reflecting the local economy, whether jobs and income in the local economy. And that was the concern that potential bidders had with the casino issues. Because with potential job losses locally, that would directly impact the golf course. And I can't speak to the prognosis going forward.
Say a professional opinion is, at best, it would stay flat?
Yes.
Matt, any experience with the food and beverage industry? We haven't put a value on it.
Yeah.
And it is included in this proposal. It is essentially a restaurant and bar that is included in this proposal that Mr. Jaworski would operate. Is there any way to quantify what the potential value in terms of revenue that might be?
Those are not, typically when you value a golf course, if you break out the food and beverage component of it, it's typically worth less than the golf component of it because it's a more volatile business. The margins are not as good. If you sell an additional greens fee for $35, that's $35 right into your pocket typically. If you sell another dinner for $25, your cost related to that is higher, and so you don't have the same flow through of cash flow. So typically restaurants would sell for a lower multiple than golf courses would. So in Brigantine's situation, the restaurant there is more of an amenity to the golfer. It's not really large enough to be a banquet center or so forth, and so its value is really as an amenity. And I know in your projection here you did not include food and beverage. I think it would be fair to say that that aspect of it would be break even or negligibly profitable, but not a real driver of the value.
I have a question. Commonly, when you put out these RFPs, about how many responses would you get?
This typically...
I know you said you only got 8.
Typically 7 to 10. It depends on the location, how desirable the golf course is. And but then that's how many responses you get at the mandatory meeting, and then you'll typically get 3 or 4 or 5 bids. And so this, if it wasn't for the economic issues tied to the casinos, I think you would have received another 2 or 3 bids from people that already operate other courses in New Jersey.
But you only come out with one viable proposal. Is
Correct.
that normal?
No, that's below normal.
That's what I
below
thought.
average. Yeah.
Okay. Also, if this golf course has major issues, like the entire irrigation system has to be replaced, will Mr. Jaworski pay for that, or is that going to come back to the city?
The way it would have been structured is essentially as a triple net lease. So the operator would be responsible for all improvements. So if the greens died, if there was a flood, some of them are insurable, of course, but they would be responsible for it. What was the finer points that we never got to the point of negotiating would be at what point do you draw the line where the city's responsible versus the operator. For example, if a water main blows in the driveway, who's responsible for that? Or if there's a major structural foundation issue in a clubhouse that might have been there for 10 years, who's responsible for that? So those finer points weren't narrowed down, but the intent of the lease is to shift that burden to the operator. So everything could be great for 10 years, and in the 11th year, you could have a sinkhole. That's their obligation.
Now, at this stage in the negotiation, say, or where the process is unfolding, is it standard operating procedure, say, just to have a very broad cover like we have now and not have the details delved into, say, or not necessarily thoroughly spelled out, but a better handle on details than we have already?
They're handled differently. In some cases, you have a contract that'll go out with the RFP, and the proposal says, this is the contract you're gonna get, this is what you have to sign, no ifs, ands, or buts. And in some cases, they address just the general framework of the economics and capital and whatnot, but then you have to go through the finer points. In this case, because we were asking for significant capital to go into a established master plan, there would have been more detailed discussions over what aspects of the master plan you'll cover to what level of detail. It would have been a fairly detailed thing before it was signed.
Now, if we come to sign this with Jaworski, is there a possibility that when we get, assuming we get into the details, that at that point someone can walk away?
They still have a $10,000 bid bond on deposit, which is basically what would be forfeited if they were accepted but did not execute the lease. So it's not the hugest penalty in the world, but it basically would compensate the city for having to reoffer the bid again, or go to the next bidder, or issue an RFP again.
Does that happen very often, that people walk away at that stage?
Not usually.
Hey, Matt,
Yes.
since you had this bleak outlook for our course, why would Mr. Jaworski would even come here?
I think, and if I were in his shoes, I think the fact that he has an existing network of courses in southern New Jersey makes it more appealing to him. If this was a one-off property and I was based 50 miles away, it really would not have much appeal. But
Why wouldn't he just go over and get Harbor Pines?
I'm sorry?
Why wouldn't he just go buy Harbor Pines? Driving course, beautiful facility.
That may be why they're not returning my calls.
Okay. So we really don't know if Mr. Jaworski's still even interested.
Very early on in the discussion, one of the comments I made with the city council is, your competition for a bid is somebody being able to go out and buy another course, because you can go buy a number of courses around here for $2 or $3 million and have places that don't need $1 million in renovations. And so that's the challenge, and you can finance them with 20–30% down and own it outright and have the depreciation benefit. So that's your competition, is somebody that has the capital and the experience, but they'd rather own versus lease. And one of the initial concepts, initially we believed that the owner, or the operator of the course would not be on the hook for real estate taxes, but then after further review, actually after the RFP had been issued, we realized that under New Jersey law, we would have to charge taxes, and that became an issue.
Go from nonprofit to a profit.
Now, that gave rise to the discussion of, is the $6 million assessment reasonable, and what can you do to reconcile that?
Mr. Jaworski said whatever he's paying in taxes, that's what he's going to,
Correct.
in a rent, taxes are going to be included.
Correct.
So that's on a triple net lease like you stated previously.
Well, you'd have
We're
to
going right back to, we don't know what Mr. Jaworski's really offering.
Well, what he would say, for the sake of argument, the $6 million assessment was really $1 million, and the $30,000 or whatever in the schedule is $5,000. You just net that out of the rest of his check.
Because it's not triple net.
But they also were going to, but it would be arm's length in every other respect. They would have to pay for water, they'd have to pay for other utilities. I mean, they would be on the hook just like any other private owner and operator would be. So, but it's a challenging market. Harbor Pines just came on the market a week or two ago. That's a realistic alternative. I think he paid $3.5 for Blue Heron. I sold it for $6.25, so he got a good deal on it. And but I think, to your other question, that's the appeal, having this property in his network where he can co-market it with his other properties has some appeal that might not appeal to a one-off operator from further away.
The other point with this proposal is that we're looking at basically a 5-year lease with an option by Mr. Jaworski to renew.
Well, that was something we had ultimately, when we started negotiating with them, we reintroduced. Originally, it was a 24-year straight lease the whole time. And
I said at that time, nobody in their right mind will go in a 24-year lease.
correct. Because we weren't getting escalators and percentage rent, we wanted the ability to shorten it, and so we went back with the idea of a shorter term with renewal options and whatnot, but it would give us a second bite at the apple should things improve.
But if
Mr.
Under
Jaworski
these-
came back with the shorter term and everything else. We didn't come back to that.
No,
We never told you to go ahead and negotiate a
Yeah,
lower lease.
they came back with a shorter term,
And-
with the right of
and a
first,
smaller amount of capital going in.
in the first
First, it
five.
was $500,000 over 4 years. Now it's $300,000 over 5 years, and we haven't got down to signing anything yet.
Yeah.
So, okay.
The other part of this is if you have a 5-year lease, the option to renew, does that rest solely with Jaworski?
I think what they had asked for was, in one of the subsequent proposals, was a right of first refusal if it were put back out. And the concern, to Councilman Simpson's question, their concern was they lowered the capital because they would only have 5 years potentially to amortize it and not a longer term. So they came back with that lower number.
But it was $500,000 in 4 years. Now it's $300,000 over 5 years.
Yes.
So it's a longer term with less amount.
But that was a lease of 24 years.
Yeah, but he still has 2 5-year options, so it's a 15-year lease. You know, and I told everybody for a year that nobody would, in their right mind, no attorney would allow their client to sign a 24-year straight lease, and everybody says, yes, they would, yes, they would.
I believe the options were a right of first refusal, so if the city,
On the 16 years to the 24 years is
well, if the
first
city,
refusal.
if the city put it out to bid again and had somebody bid with
Right.
CapEx and all that, they had the right to match that.
That's correct. That, 16 years on.
But the 24-year figure doesn't figure into anything now.
Right, but
It's,
I'm trying to
It's a
clarify,
non-issue.
the question I asked was, because the way this reads, it says year 6 through 10 extension at the choice of Ron Jaworski Golf. So maybe it's a question for Mr. Cerny. If at the end of 5 years, and not to have a negative approach to this, but if in fact, at the end of 5 years, there are issues with the operation of the course, maybe homeowners aren't happy or whatever, what are the city's rights in that regard?
Well, the way this is drafted, going from year 5 to year 6, that's at the option of Ron Jaworski Golf. That's not a city option.
That's correct.
And the same thing when you go from year 10 to year 11. When you get to year 15 going into year 16, the municipality has the ability to go out and rebid. And it's at that point that Jaworski Golf proposes a right of first refusal flowing to them, but at least the city can get out on the bid process. For the first 15 years, those rollovers every 5 years are at the option of Jaworski Golf. So, and Mayor, while I have the microphone for a moment, the conversation about real estate taxes and a $6 million assessment, the background on that is when that number surfaced, we had consultation with the assessor and with the reval company that did the previous reval for the municipality. The result of that conversation and the efforts of the reval company going out and looking at whatever relevant information and due diligence that they chose to engage brought them back at $1.7 million. I believe it was approximately $1.7 million. My understanding is that the assessor was going to basically accept that number and put it on the books. Now, I don't know if that has hit the books, but at the level of those professionals, there has been that discussion that the real number is $1.7 million, not $6 million.
Mr. Stinson, what's on the books as of yesterday?
So in response to Lisa's email, I went to the tax assessor, and the books have whatever the number was, 6 something.
$6,379,000.
That's what's on the books.
So that's the number. If you're going to do a performer, you have to work off that number, not assume a number that might come down the line.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Galvin?
Yeah, I have a question. If there was a master plan put together for capital improvements on the golf course, how come Mr. Jaworski was not willing to discuss which of those capital improvements he would put in as a result of the lease going forward?
Well, he had identified that he would address the drainage and irrigation issues. He did not, the master plan had a menu of other options, including short game practice areas and different options. And some of the items, he indicated they would do in-house on an ongoing basis. For example, leveling a tee, you could do it in-house with through your day-to-day normal maintenance practices. You could bite off some of those projects over time. So he had identified conceptually irrigation and drainage, and had it gotten to the next level, it would have been much more specific as far as scope of work and timelines and so forth.
If you had to replace the drainage in the golf course, about, not the drainage, I'm sorry, the irrigation, about how much do you think that is?
If you had to do from scratch, it would be at least $1 million if you had to do everything.
Okay. So, and he's willing to put in a total of 300,000. What happens if that irrigation cost exceeds the amount of money that he's willing to put in? Is the city on the hook?
Well, again, he proposed that as the minimum, so I don't know if he would go over that. And I'm not sure how much that he would do over time through in-house practice, fixing a head here and there, and so forth. So he just bid a minimum number and did not get more specific than that at this time.
But logically, to keep the business going, he would have to put in everything he needs to keep the course functioning, no?
Or come back to the
Correct,
city.
that's a balancing act. You want to make sure you prudently reinvest to attract customers back, and sometimes you don't want to overinvest either, so
Right.
that's the balancing.
So that goes back to the question, and probably some of the conversations you wanted to have with Jaworski Goff along with our solicitor. What constitutes a capital investment? If you're leveling a tee or working, is that, I don't know, I'm not a golf expert. Is that maintenance? Is it capital improvement? What is it? And when you talk about drainage, clearing out the drainage ditches for about $17,000 made a huge improvement on the course. So, those kind of things, those conversations had to take place, which they haven't. But Vince, any other questions?
Yeah, looking at this too, he says, minimum the first 5 years of 300,000. So that 300,000 could be put in totally in the 5th year, so years 1 through 4 could see nothing.
That was going to be part of a negotiation, had we gotten to that point. If we were certainly going to try to push to have more of it up front as possible. And they'd indicated, and if, to my understanding of the course, one of the large issues there is the drainage, which directly impacts revenue. And so it would behoove them to do it sooner rather than later to get the maximum benefit of driving more business.
I guess what my major question is, it seems like Mr. Jaworski is asking us to commit to the deal before he gives us the details.
Yes and no. I mean, we issued the RFP, he responded to it. We have not responded back other than asking him to sharpen his pencil, which he did, or he remodeled it, and we have not responded back to that.
Well,
So-
you responded back asking for details, and you haven't received details.
Well, at that point, they indicated, and I'm just the messenger, but
Right.
Right, absolutely.
at
We
that-
we understand it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's-
At that point, they indicated they wanted to know if they were at least on the same page. They understood, having 0 rent for 2 years and 50,000 going up to 100, it was not an overwhelming proposal. So I think they wanted to have an idea that were they even on the same page with the city before getting into the minutia.
Mr. Galvin, what was communicated to council in that regard was that the Jaworski organization did want to get some kind of feedback from council as a body that the deal points were acceptable in order to, and as a predicate to, entering into the more detailed negotiations you would typically do in order to actually bring things down to a contract. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, they wanted a positive notification that the rent terms were acceptable before getting into the other issues.
Thank you.
One more quick question about a marketing budget, a course this size and in this area. What would, is there a percentage, or how do you determine what your marketing budget would be?
No, there's not a fixed thing. It depends on whether or not, not including the personnel, a person to do it, but you might spend 20 to 50,000 in marketing.
That's
And-
without the salary of the person who's doing it.
That'd be internet and printing and postage and billboards, and that would be a round number.
And that would come out of the
Thank you.
capital improvements?
No, that'd be
No.
a day-to-day operating expense.
Okay, any other questions by members of council on the Jaworski proposal?
But we don't know what their day-to-day operating expenses, what their range of expenses would be.
I'd have to refresh my memory, but in the RFP, we asked them to provide a budget of what they would do, and I'd have to, it's been a while, I have to go back to see what level of detail they provided in there. And,
But they accept the risk for the operating, for
They
all
ex-
the operating expenses.
correct, the day-to-day operating expenses of payroll and supplies and
Insurances.
insurance and that type of thing, it would be their obligation. And that's
And
something
utilities.
I should highlight. The goal is to shift the financial obligation and the downside risk to a third party. They're only as good as their balance sheet and their ability to stand behind it. So we never got to the point of security deposit or personal guarantees or anything like that. So, you know, that's an important detail.
Great. Would you mind having a seat? And
Oh, no problem.
I'm sure there'll be questions
Thank
from the
you.
public. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Okay. There's another proposal that's been developed. Councilman Simpson has worked on this proposal to look at the formation of a nonprofit and how that might impact financially on the operation of the course. Councilman Simpson, do you want to present that?
I would ask our auditor to present that because, he's a third party or whatever, and might be a little biased.
Okay, the proposal that you worked on, and I helped you put together the format of it.
Excuse me, could you get
Yeah,
closer
yes.
to the mic? Right up against it.
The proposal that you're
Can you-
presenting,
Can you hear him?
No. Is that on?
yes, it's on.
Why don't you hold the other one?
Okay. The proposal that
Speak up.
that we worked on, I helped you put this together in a presentation
Right.
Package, was what would the effect be if you formed a nonprofit and had a nonprofit operate the golf course, and what would that mean? The city is obligated for $1,155,125 for the next 4 years in debt service payments. That's no matter who operates the golf course. The city has made the first payment in 2015, which was due January 15th. So $380,000 has already been paid in January of 15. So there's one interest payment left in 15 for $20,962.50, and then the next 3 years principal and interest, and that total comes to the $1,555,000. You received the printout of what the golf course did in 2014 expense-wise without debt service, and that was the $1,070,131.54. You went through those costs and eliminated 6 items or changed 6 items of costs that the nonprofit in your proposal would not have those expenses, to bring the net cost down to $825,000. That $825,000 was then carried over to the current revenue of $990,000, and for 5 years, since the Jaworski proposal was 5 years, for 5
That's
years,
correct.
use $990,000 in revenue, $825,000 in cost, or produced a $165,000 profit with this nonprofit. You had made the assumption that you would borrow enough money to cover the city's debt service for the next 3 years and pay completely all the debt service that the city had outstanding, or borrowing $300,000, then $180,000, then $220,000. And that would, under this format, would be enough to cover the debt service. Again, all these are based on assumptions on, well, facts are the debt is a fact, last year's expenses were a fact. The assumptions are what you could reduce expenses by, and the assumption is that the revenue does not change and those expenses don't change over the 5-year period. And that a line of credit would be used to help fund what the city needed to cover its debt service, along with any other minor capital, not major capital, minor capital items that need to be done during this period of time. Then at the end of the city's debt, then that nonprofit would pay down its line of credit and operate the golf course theoretically at a profit. I mean, no one knows what that's going to be, but that's what the proposal that you set forth
That's
entailed.
with no F&B in there?
There's no food and beverage in it at all.
So that's the
None.
cherry on top. If we get $1, we
Whatever
get
you
$1.
get is additional amount, yes.
Okay.
Because in this, if the nonprofit were to operate the food and beverage and make $15,000 worth of profit, just to pick a
Right.
number, that $15,000 would go to its bottom line, would reduce the line of credit that would be needed, or be invested more into the golf course, whatever the choice would be.
Whatever the nonprofit chooses
Exactly.
to do.
Mhm. And you have a very similar nonprofit operating the golf course out in Egg Harbor Township, is basically what you're modeling this off of.
But under this one, the debt is paid by the nonprofit, not paid by the
Right, the
taxpayers.
township still pays the debt over
Okay.
in Egg Harbor Township.
Correct.
And the, oops.
I don't understand how how in the not-for-profit, do you reduce or eliminate things like water and insurance and payroll and electricity?
Well,
Are they zeroed out?
I'll explain that.
Okay.
Okay, the first item under the nonprofit would be eliminating the management fee. Right now, we pay $7,500 a month to the management fee. That's $90,000 a year. I'm going to get back to the water bill. The professional fees were Mr. Cerny's law firm, including Mr. Galvin, his fee, and Mr. Stephen Kay's fee. We would not have those costs. The $1,070,000 where we started out with, that's what actually it costs to run the golf course without any debt service.
What happens if you need to pay a lawyer, though?
You would not be paying them for ongoing negotiations like we've been paying them. You know, $1,000, whatever. We've been paying the attorney every time we talk about this, ongoing negotiations with Mr. Jaworski and everything else. His fee is a lot more than a regular business would have took in. His professional fees of Stephen Kay, that's a one-time fee, was charged out of that $1,070,000. Mr. Galvin, it would not be hired again, so his fee would not be in there. So the insurance, I had my insurance agent give me a cost of insurance. He said he could save me $8,000. Payroll, there are certain people on payroll that need to take a haircut. No fun so I sat down with Mr. Nathan Robbins and talked about what we could save on payroll. Conservatively, $40,000 a year. The electric would be paid by the food and beverage person, whoever we lease to, hire, or whatever the case may be.
For the entire operation?
That's not the entire, that was for the clubhouse. That was $17,000 we took
Okay.
off there. So that brings, getting back to the water. Mr. Jaworski said he would pay for the water. Under my proposal, I'm paying, the nonprofit's paying $1,155,000 to the taxpayer, so their debt service is paid. So
Wait.
that's why under my proposal, I would not want to pay the water bill, because we're just taking it out of one pocket and putting in the next pocket. We're all the same people.
So who would pay the water bill?
So the city's giving the water to the golf course?
So we cut down the cost of doing business to $825,000. Our revenue is $990,000 last year. Shows you a gross profit of $165,000. As you see in the performer, it does not give increases of $990,000. It's $990,000 for every year. If I was taking this to a bank or doing a business plan, there would be increases. It would be $1.2 million, $1.3 million, $1.4 million, and so on. Conservatively, we do $990,000. Mr. Gavin just said that the golf is flat around here.
But what about costs of operations? They don't go up? I mean, we at least have 2% inflation, 2.5% inflation nationally.
Okay, Joe. Then if you want to, you can't have it both ways. You have $990,000. Does that go up? Yes. Does it go down? If it goes down, the cost of doing business will go down.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, if you know how to run a business, yeah, it will. Yeah. I love
Well,
these
excuse
people
me,
out
folks, we're not having a debate right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
But we're not having a debate about this proposal. We'll have public
here.
comment in just a
I
moment.
mean, if you have 10 employees and your profit goes down or your income goes down, you eliminate your salaries, just like we're talking about in the city. So when we don't have as many people, Mr. Stinson is working on lowering the cost of doing business in the city of Brigantine. So exactly the same thing. So you would take out the line of credit out of $300,000. You would pay the $20,962, carry it over. You would also pay the $385,000 that the taxpayers is on the hook for. If you had this proposal, we would be paying that. Every taxpayer in here would be paying the $385 plus the $20,000 plus the $381 in year 2017 and $367. I'm trying to give you alternatives to a guaranteed loss of $1,155,000 to the city of Brigantine for every taxpayer in here.
But
Wait a minute, Joe. If you give it a chance, we got 2 years that we have to pay out to the county every year, our tax money. We'd have to pay our fees. We'd have to pay our cost of our bond payments. That comes out to $860,000, where we're not receiving anything under Mr. Jaworski's deal. If you give it a chance, if it doesn't work, the worst thing you can do is put it out for RFP again. That's all you can do. You know, I see people shaking their head and everything like that, and I'm sure they're just one-sided. I'm not trying, it's not going to make a difference to me if Mr. Gavin was running the golf course, Mr. Costello, Mr. Stinson. I'm still going to play golf in there. I'm just trying to save the money to the taxpayers of Brigantine. I'm giving it a chance. That's all I'm trying to do. If it doesn't work, it's not going to cost you anything. You're still going to have to pay the $860,000 no matter what. So,
when you have the $300,000, like before you said that, paying the water bill was just taking money from one pocket and put it in the other.
that's
But
correct.
with the $300,000, the taxpayers are still ultimately responsible for that.
Yeah.
Everything comes down, all the risk is still on the back of the taxpayers.
Well, you got a guaranteed loss of $1,056,000, Joe. How's that going away?
How is guaranteeing that money?
How's the $1,056,000 going away? At the end of 4 years, you're in debt $700,000 as a nonprofit. I'm not talking about a couple golfers getting together and making this nonprofit up. I'm talking about professional people.
Let me ask Mr. Costello so we can put in perspective. Looking at the two proposals, could in terms of revenue from Mr. Jaworski and revenue from the nonprofit, how does that impact the debt service payments for the city of Brigantine?
Okay, it's rather clear from the Jaworski side that you'll pay all the debt service. The taxpayers will pay all the debt service.
Guaranteed.
You're getting basically nothing for
Plus
the
the
first 5
taxes
years.
for the first 2 years to the county.
Plus you're gonna pay
You're
some
getting
taxes.
capital improvements, though,
You don't know what they're going
and
to be.
$250,000.
Can I answer the question? Right. So it's clear from what the proposal from Jaworski is that you will pay all the debt service and the taxpayers will pay the debt service. I mean, that's a given. There's no real question about that. There's no money coming in 15, 16. There's only $50,000 in 17, $100,000 in 18 and 19. And Mr. Simpson did not take the school and the county tax into consideration, which I thought you should, because the same principle with the water on the other side is going from one pocket to another pocket. But realistically, the Jaworski deal should also pay the school and the city taxes, which were not included. If you look at the chart, Mr. Simpson only wanted to include the county tax as an outlay because that physically had to be a check written to give to the county. The local tax and school tax were not physical checks that had to be written because they're still within the organization per se. But realistically, if the Jaworski lease was in effect, they'd pay all those taxes, not just the county. So the city would get property tax and school tax, but again, it would be the kind of putting it from one hand to another hand.
What- But if these assumptions don't come to
Well,
fruition.
okay, let me finish.
Okay.
Okay, so on the Jaworski side, is it clear that you will pay all the debt service and you're going to receive very little from the proposed lease for the first 5 years? I think that's pretty obvious, and Mr. Glavis stated that there's very minimal amounts that the city's going to get in the Jaworski proposal. Let's forget capital for a second, because I know that's obviously an important issue. The capital is going to be on both sides. Either side's going to do the capital, no matter who it is. I think Mr. Sear asked a question, what happens if the sprinkler system goes down and costs $1 million to fix? Right now, you have a guarantee that $300,000 will be paid, and you're stuck for $700,000
No.
from the way it's written. I mean, that's what
No,
it's.
that's the minimum, he said, he would put in.
Well, again, you don't have the final details. Yeah, but, and it could be that he paid the whole $1 million. I don't know. We don't know that right now. But, wait, I'm still answering Phil's question.
Wait a minute, the guy has a
Let him
contract for
finish on the,
5 years, and you're gonna ask him to pay $1.2 million for water, that's ridiculous, come on. That's pie in the sky there.
Yeah, well, again, I can't answer for what he would or wouldn't
We
do.
don't know
Yeah.
what he's willing to pay
Right.
anyway.
As all I know was on the piece of paper
So-
that the
Right.
proposal. So, back to finishing Phil's question, is that the guaranteed amount that costs the taxpayers is over $1 million under the Jaworski proposal. And I don't think anybody can disagree with that. That you still are paying your debt service and you're getting very little back from his lease. Then, the other option that Mr. Simpson's providing is to form this organization, run the golf course, and pay back the city its debt service through operations and borrowings. And when the debt service is done, it would pay its debt service off. That's the principle on what his proposal is using. Or is it a guarantee? Of course it's not a guarantee.
What is
This is a proposal. Pardon me?
What is in life? What is in life?
Yeah, oh yeah. So
Well,
the thing is that you know that you will pay $400,000 in 15 and 16 for debt service for the golf course, and you're going to get nothing for it. So you're out $800 and some thousand in the first 2 years. That's a given. If this proposal works for a nonprofit, then there's an opportunity to pay all that debt service if this in fact did come true.
And what if it doesn't come true, though?
What if it doesn't come
What if the
true?
golf industry keeps tanking
Then
like it has been?
you pay your debt service, like you would have under the
Right,
Jaworski
and then
proposal.
what about the line of credit? Who's responsible for that?
The line of credit would be in the nonprofit. That has not been, and again, we'll have to talk about formulating the nonprofit and how that's going to be operated. That there are questions. And the liquor license, where's the liquor license go between the two? There's a lot of questions.
No, but what I guess my bottom line question, isn't the city the guarantor for any debt or anything that the not-for-profit cannot sustain if it fails?
I'll
Doesn't
defer
it
to the
land back
solicitor.
onto the city's shoulders?
It's going to be how it's structured.
Well,
Well, no matter how it's structured, a bank or whoever is there is going to want their money from someplace.
Yeah.
They can't foreclose on the golf course.
No, they cannot.
So
The non-for-profit will be a shell.
So don't they come after the city then?
I imagine they would.
I mean, Mr. Costello, if I may, and you may not know this, but the only information which I've been provided to date about a not-for-profit is the two-page summary that you've been talking about. We have not been, I say we, I know I haven't, I'm not sure, I can't speak for the others up here, have not been given anything to describe what the proposed structure of the not-for-profit would be. How many people would it be? Who would appoint these people? Would the not-for-profit be covered by things like the prevailing wage law? When they were to do if the not-for-profits do capital projects, Do they have to bid those projects out? When they're hiring professionals, you know, what are the constraints or restrictions there? We haven't been told any of that. So let me just ask you, are you familiar with any of that? Have you had any discussions with anyone about the structure or those kind of issues?
That was all part of what tonight was going to be, you know, how to form this and what the setup would be, what would be the restrictions on it.
All right, well,
Mr. Stinson, do you have the Jaworski deal?
The Jaworski proposal,
Yes.
the one that I included in the bid package?
Can I have, see, sir?
Mr. Costello, if I could just finish my question. Am I right, and if Mr. Cerny wants to jump in, feel free. Am I right that a not-for-profit
Where's the
does
first
not
one
have
out there?
any independent capital that it brings to the undertaking? This would be a new entity that would be created to run the golf course.
That's correct.
And the only money that's going to be available to the not-for-profit for whatever purposes, to cover operating expenses, capital investment, is going to be money that is either generated by ongoing operations at the golf course or money which is borrowed.
Yes.
And money which is borrowed is, in one form or another, whatever the particular structure may be, but that money is guaranteed by the city of Brigantine, right?
That's probably true, yes.
If operating expenses increase and revenues decline, that's more money we would have to borrow to operate and pay our debt. Is that, that's correct?
The nonprofit would be borrowing more money to operate.
Yes, so if operating expenses increase, if revenue declines, and golf course revenue has been declining, we've seen a decline right here for the last 7 years. So I don't know how you could say you're going to have steady golf revenues. So no matter how, if you have a increase in operating costs and a decline in revenue, it's going to be more money that the taxpayers will be on the hook for.
If this was in operation for 2 years and was successful for 2 years, which is a short window for prediction, $800,000 would be relieved of what the city owed already, with only $300,000 being borrowed. Again, it's a proposal.
$500,000 pretty good.
Yeah.
But the risk is still with the city and the taxpayers, all of the risk.
And so is the $400,000 a year is a guaranteed amount that you owe.
Wait, say that again?
You owe $400,000 for the
Yes,
next
no, I realize,
4 years.
but I mean, it's not a risk. We're responsible for that.
Yes.
And we've been budgeting it in.
This is to
But
try
I-
and relieve
but-
that $400,000 per year.
Doesn't make sense.
By borrowing
Doesn't make
money
sense.
to pay money that's borrowed.
By using the money that's generated from the nonprofit's operations and borrowing money to take all the taxpayers' burden off over a period of 3 years, then the nonprofit would pay off its debt over the next whatever many years it's still functioning. It's not going to just operate for 3 years and go away unless that's what council decides.
Mr. Costello, if I could, a couple more follow-up questions. The assumptions with respect to cost reduction that are detailed in the 2-page proposal,
Yes.
I believe I heard you say those were not assumptions that you came up with, but rather you used the numbers that Councilman Simpson came up with.
Correct.
So you just basically plug them in.
Yeah, these are the numbers he asked me to put in.
Now, so you haven't independently evaluated the ability, the possibility or the plausibility of actually realizing costs of that magnitude in these different categories, have you?
Well, some of them, yes. I mean, the management fee is $90,000. That's guaranteed. That you're paying that right now.
Well,
That you would not pay.
well, and let me ask then, built into that though, are we assuming that the $90,000 that we paid and have been paying for the management fee generated nothing of value which would have to be replaced by expenditures on other people or other items? Are we assuming that $90,000 is basically money down the toilet right now? We can cross that out and have no loss of efficiency in the operation.
I believe that Mr. Simpson has spoken with the people at the golf course, and that the $90,000 would not, by removing that, would not hurt the operations of the golf course.
And any capital improvements, or say risk, if the roof has to be replaced, or we keep hearing about the irrigation system as just being pieced together, and that's going to have to be an issue. There's no provision here for any capital investment, or not even capital investment, just to repair something that breaks down.
And another proposal you don't have. Here's Mr. Jaworski's proposal, everybody. This is what you're going to be tied up to. One page, one line item.
Well.
That's what you're supposed to hang your hat on. Guys.
No,
Andy, the
not
other
true.
proposal
You
is
know
2
it.
pages.
There's a lot of white space.
Let me also, if I can interject and ask for just a moment. And Mr. Costello has talked about the difference in debt service, and we looked at that. Debt service isn't going away. It's how you propose to fund it, especially, excuse me. Debt service isn't going away. It's how you propose to fund it in the first, especially the first 2 years, because there is no revenue coming back to the city in the one proposal. I also think it's important that we talk for a moment about Mr. Simpson's qualifications to present a business proposal. Mr. Simpson is in the business world, owns multiple businesses. So, Mr. Simpson, without, I know you probably don't want to discuss all the things you're involved in, but could you, for the purposes of the people who are here, give us an indication of some of the businesses that you have operated and are continuing to operate at this present time?
I presently own, with a partner in Brigantine, Bootlegger Liquors. I have an investment company that owns multiple commercial properties throughout South Jersey. Bootlegger Liquors is one of the highest grossing liquor stores in South Jersey. I also own a commercial development company. Presently, it has $30 million under contract. I deal with banks all the time. I do performers all the time, and this is how I run my business. I get lines of credit, pay for my manpower, my sometimes payrolls from $100,000 a week to $250,000 a week. It depends how many jobs we have going. So you have to have working capital there. That doesn't mean if you have $5 million out, or you have $7 million coming in, you're making money, people. Again, this does not, I have no problem with Mr. Jaworski. If he took care of the taxpayer, I have no problem with Mr. Jaworski running the course.
But-
I will play that course. Everybody else out here, whoever's going to play golf,
But
will
Andy-
play that course.
An-
So it doesn't have nothing to do with me against Mr. Jaworski, or me against the Democrats, or me against Vince or Matt Galvin. It's the taxpayers. We got $1,055,000. We got a shot of having zero, and it's not short-term, it's a long-term thing. The golf course is not going away. We still have control over it. Somebody has poison ivy, we'll be able to send our people down there. I understand when American Golf, somebody had a poison ivy problem. They said, that's not our problem. Well, it's on your property, it doesn't matter. So we still have control over the course, and again, I played a lot of golf with a lot of celebrities. And I haven't played with Mr. Jaworski or anything like that, but I have played with a lot of other people. I've played in pro-ams, played in professional tournaments. I have no problem with Mr. Jaworski running our golf course, but when the taxpayers has to fund his $1,055,000, it doesn't make sense to me.
But Andy, when you get a line of credit,
Yes, sir.
or borrow from a bank,
Yes.
you have real property when you have inventory,
No, I
that,
have
that's
contracts.
collateral.
I have contracts, Joe.
But you still have collateral that the banks can rely on.
Right,
When the city takes out a line of credit,
right.
what do we have except the wallets of the taxpayers?
And the taxpayers are guaranteed $1,055,000 loss here, Joe.
Let me-
Hardly.
Andy, you've been very successful in business, and I
Thank you.
respect that. But,
But, go ahead.
this is a golf course. Golf course is a unique thing. And although I have not purchased or sold businesses myself, I've represented people in many substantial transactions.
Mhm.
People of accomplishment and great business acumen and great wealth. Those people don't take stuff at face value. They do their due diligence. They want to know, these are your assumptions, where do they come from? Now, for the first time, when we received this two-page proposal, this is the first I had seen any itemization of the proposed cost savings. And I've asked Mr. Costello if he generated them, and he said, no, you have generated them. I would like to see,
These are-
allowing for the fact that you're an excellent businessman, but I want to see, because I'm the person among 7 charged with making a decision on this, and I'm not going to make a decision with spotty or incomplete information or because I'm just going to take something on faith. So I would like to see, in terms of the overall picture of the golf course's expenditures historically in 2000, let's say 13 and 14, are these realistic targets for
Well,
savings?
The
That's what I'd like to say.
2014 numbers were right there, and I took it right off.
No, I
our
see what the
orders.
overall number is, Andy, but in
Right.
terms of the budget, if we're talking about saving so much on professional fees, for example, was it a $50,000 number that was charged against the golf course? And is that $50,000 all attributable to negotiations that happened versus the normal operational needs of any business? And they do need lawyers, and they do need engineers, and they do need other
Matt,
professionals.
yeah, nobody needs a lawyer, in my opinion, but,
No
Matt Ga-
offense, Mr.
Yeah, Mr. Sherry, no problem.
Andy, and
Matt Galvin was $15,000, roughly, somewhere in there. Stephen Kay was $15,000, that was $30,000. Mr. Cerny was $19,000 and change. I didn't even put in $25,000 for the auditor of last year. So there's another $25,000 that after I have this up there, I found out the auditor charges $25,000 to do the work on that, which is absolutely off the charts. But these are the true numbers. We talk and talk and talk about it, and, again, we'll let the public talk to us, and we'll go from there, but I understand.
But shouldn't there be a provision in this for professional services? Like, it seems to me, if you're going to be running the golf course, even the not-for-profit is going to need legal representation and fees and advice.
Well,
So where does that come from?
Well, there's a gentleman out here who's going to talk about the nonprofit. We have people that are, sometimes you take yourself out and trade. You give them a membership.
But then that drops your income.
No, it doesn't. If they weren't playing the course in the first place and you give them a membership, it doesn't do it.
Well, you also didn't break out all of the costs, like, for instance, how much fertilizer you're going to buy. I mean.
But that's all in the $1.7 million.
Right, it's all in the $1.7 million operational cost. So, I mean, you could sit here and try and figure out every item that a golf course buys over the last year or two and try and look at it that way, or you can look at the total cost of operation, which you have there, as the $1.7 million.
If you have number of rounds diminishing, your cost of fertilizers doesn't go down. In fact, it's probably going to go up with inflation, and you still have to put on as much fertilizer when there are less rounds because you have to maintain the course, or else you're really going to lose even more. So, how does that's why the issue of everything being flat,
Well,
to me, it doesn't make
We keep on saying that,
make sense.
and then we must, and no offense against Mr. Jaworski if he's listening, we must think he's a freaking moron to take our golf course over. You keep on telling it we're going down the tubes, we're going down the tubes, we're going down the tubes. And we have Mr. Jaworski willing to give us nothing, and we just keep on talking about this guy's our savior.
I don't think the
I
golf...
don't see a savior here.
I don't think the
And
golf
I don't
course
see
is-
what we can't do it,
I don't
we
think-
can't put it out for RFP.
I
2
don't
years
think
from
the
now,
golf course
Mr.
is
Gavin is
is-
willing to do it for free.
I don't think
so
the
it
golf
won't hit our
course is-
bottom line.
I don't think the golf course is going down
Is
the
there
tubes
a-
at all. I don't think the golf course is going down the tubes by any means, and I don't see Mr. Jaworski as the savior who's coming off the cross to save us. That's not the issue.
Andy,
But the issue is, ultimately, the risk for the not-for-profit lies on the shoulders of the taxpayers, where if Mr. Jaworski comes in, he bears the risk.
Well,
That's-
Joe,
that's-
let's be very
do you
honest
mean,
about
no?
this, though. Mr. Jaworski is signing up for 5 years. All right? He's not signing up for the entire length of the golf
That's right.
course. So his maximum exposure in that 5-year period, in terms of capital, would be $300,000.
Well, no, that's a
Maximum.
minimum.
Now, well,
Yeah, it's a
no,
minimum.
his maximum exposure is
And we don't want the
$300,000.
$300,000.
Not if he's going to have to do the drainage and the irrigation
Well,
up front.
what we have on paper is what the maximum exposure, what he is required to put in. I know the difference between maximum and minimum. Excuse me. The difference is what he is required to put in is $300,000. That's the requirement. That's his minimum, but that is the maximum amount that he's required to put in. So,
but if he's
with
gonna
that
keep-
said, you have a 5-year contract. You don't have someone saying they're signing on and we're going to take all this burden for any capital improvement for the next 24 years.
No, but the thing is here, if, say, something happens and it, in the first year, first 2 years, that cost $400,000, but if you don't do it, you're not going to have a playable course, he's going to put the money in there because he won't have any chance of recuperating it.
Or he's going to come back to the city.
That's why it's a minimum.
Or it's going to come back to the city.
I have a question.
No, it's,
I-
no, he's
I
not
had a
gonna come
question.
back to the city.
Andy, how will the taxpayers know in a non-for-profit? How are the taxpayers going to know what's going on with the course financially?
Well,
How do we know that? How do we know where the money's going? How would the taxpayers know? How often would you update us? When would we get those figures?
okay. You would get the figures every time we would have a board meeting, because I believe under the nonprofit, city manager would be part of the nonprofit, either the CFO or Mr. Or auditor, whoever's at it is at the time, would be part of the nonprofit. Not a voting right. They would be in our meetings. They would look at our books and making sure the city is not, we didn't go borrow $10 million against the thing and we took a yacht and flew away.
And
does-
who would appoint those board members?
Council,
City council?
And
Would they be compensated?
no. No, I mean, I would never take anything in trade. Mr. Robbins back there right now, you can tell, if I grab a soda on the turn, I make sure I paid that soda when I come back inside.
No,
So
but
I would
But for
not,
example, an auditor sitting there is going to have a fee attached to his services. I mean, that's only just.
well, Joe,
And there's going to be
give me
other.
thousands, maybe, are you going to charge us $25,000 like the last guy? Okay.
You're going to do it for free?
Sit on that board, that would be free, yes. The board would be free.
And any work that you would have to do would be free? But would be free?
I think we need to hear from the public. And they were going to be sitting here. What time is it?
You serve as a volunteer.
I think Vince had a question. Did you?
Yeah, I know right now we're a lot of discussion about capital improvements, and I guess my concern too is if we know that there could be potentially $1 million worth of expenses going in with, just say, the sprinkler system, why would we accept something less than that? And I guess my follow-up question, or I guess my statement with that is, if Mr. Jaworski or any company comes in to lease this and the expenses get higher than what they expected, what power do we have to force them to make any of these repairs? And if they walk away or at the end of the lease they haven't done anything, isn't the city still on the hook? So we keep talking about responsibility and we keep talking about liability, but no matter which deal we go with, I still feel like ultimately the city is responsible because when the creditors or whoever it is comes after people, they're going to come after us. So then you have that going on there. So at least under this non-for-profit status, what I see is there's an opportunity to pay back or not cost the taxpayers anything. Where under the Jaworski deal, we're still guaranteeing the debt payment. So if we, the taxpayers, have to pay the debt payment, how is that beneficial to us, or how does that relieve the burden off the taxpayers? That's what I'm having a hard time understanding.
If Jaworski went belly up, he has other assets. They're not going to come after the city for something that he owes.
But his corporation, and I don't mean to interrupt, but his corporation, if today's corporation went belly up, that wouldn't be his personal assets, and I don't see him putting his personal assets on the
The
line.
bankruptcy court discharges it. It
And-
doesn't come back to the city.
Yeah, you have to draw
At
the
all.
distinction, too. If Jaworski's in there and he's entering into contracts with contractors who are going to do whatever, capital improvements, or he's got contracts with people to supply the pro shop and doesn't honor those contracts, that's between them. The city doesn't get involved in that. The city would not be a party
Rick,
to
you
that.
know better than that. Anybody that does contract work, and believe me, I know this, that if you enter into a contract, if I was building your house and I didn't pay the subcontractor, that subcontractor could lien your property.
Yes, you can lien the property because that's under the state
Well,
construction
you'd be
lien
leading
law.
the city's property, so the city
No,
would have to pay for it.
You can't because you
Here's
cannot
an
lien-
example that-
Andy, you can't lien city property, and a contract for the sale of any kind of personal goods between Jaworski and whomever is not a contract to which the city's a party. The city could not be sued.
Yes, sir. Yes,
End
sir.
of story.
I think a more realistic, I think what Vince is getting to is that, let's say that there is a lot of improvements that are needed, and at the end of 5 years, he's done with the lease and does not renew it. The city is obligated, because it's still your property, to make all those improvements. That's, I think, where you're coming from,
Wait,
is that.
Yes.
Could you say
And
that
then
again?
what's going to happen in
Let's say-
5 years, if he's in there for 3 years and he's not making any money, he's not going to put money into the course.
Yep.
And the
Mr.
course is
McCarty
going to
wanted
be.
a clarification.
I didn't understand.
And I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I think the case that Vince is trying to make is, suppose that he's in there, and he's in there for 3 years, and he's paid you $50,000, and you've paid more than that out in taxes, so your net amount that you've received is less than zero, and you've paid the $400,000 payments, and it's not gone well, and the revenue's down to $750,000. And of course, the sprinkler system breaks, the clubhouse needs a lot of repair, and he goes and leaves the property. You have to fix all that. It's your property still. It's
Well,
not his
right where we are
obligation.
now, or where the not-for-profit would be. Except the not-for-profit doesn't have any provision for capital improvements or repairs.
And if he walks away at the end of 5 years, neither does he.
But in your scenario, Mr. Costello, if we're in year 3 and Jaworski defaults on certain obligations that he has and tries to walk away from the deal, we have recourse under a lease against him.
No, I'm not
and
saying
he
he
has
I'm saying he
assets.
walks away at the end of the lease, and then the course is in disrepair.
Okay.
You know,
How,
that-
but in your
don't
scenario where
have it-
business was declining and there were capital improvements that needed to be made and weren't made or were incompletely made, if
But, okay, I'm
Jaworski's not in
saying-
the picture, the not-for-profit has
I'm
those
saying-
same problems.
I'm saying he made the $300,000 payments, but the course needs $1.5 million
Okay.
worth of work, and he leaves. It's still your obligation to do that.
Right. And as it would be, our obligation from day one under the not-for-profit scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
So you're no worse off. So only if, in a meltdown situation where Jaworski walked away, we are no worse off than we would be with the not-for-profit.
Well, if the not-for-profit for 3 years made the debt payments, you'd be that much better off,
But
and still in the same
Well,
position.
But it's still, it's using borrowed money that the city is ultimately responsible for to pay off another debt that the
But it's
city
not
has.
all
That's
borrowed
low.
money, though.
The
It's-
debt's
It's
lower.
like shifting a balance from one credit card to another.
No, it
one.
is not.
Okay,
You're taking a debt from $1.1 million, and the maximum on the other debt is $700,000. So you gain $400,000. The taxpayer,
and one of
the
the keys
taxpayers
is
didn't
that-
have to pay.
Wait, when do
Wait.
you gain that? Because you don't have fees going forward? Is that what you mean? Where do you gain the 400,000?
The difference between 700 and the 1.1 million. Well, 1.1 is what your debt service is,
Yeah,
and
and then we have-
and the maximum on the proposal is $700,000.
Yeah, let's do this a different way. Let's suppose that the golf course is doing well. All the profit that the golf course makes is kept by the Jaworski firm. All the profit that nonprofit makes pays down the debt service.
And goes into the course.
Right, but you also have the other issue, if we have somebody, at least this is what I would envision or hope for, a name like Jaworski is going to bring more business into the city in general. There's going to be that type
That's
of
ridiculous.
pass-through. Everybody says no, 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 no.
Yeah,
Well, it's
that's-
possible.
that's
Yes,
ridiculous.
yes, 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 yes. Yeah, Ross, yeah.
That's ridiculous. We have a Kennedy's here. They don't bring more business.
I,
This is the actual lifetime of the golf course through December 14th, year by year. Just for background.
Debt service?
No, this is the operation of the golf course.
Okay.
From day one. I'm not going to discuss it, just for your background information as to what happened since you bought this till now.
What about the payments on the money we borrow? The new money that we're borrowing in the credit line?
It's in the
How will that be
performer.
paid back?
It's in the performer.
The nonprofit will pay that back when they're going to pay interest on that, according to the proposal, interest on that. When the city's debt stops, then they'll start making payments on that,
For how many years?
wherever it takes to pay it off. But remember now, that's $400,000 a year that's freed up once this debt's gone after 2018.
Wait, hold on. It's not 400,000 freed up. For the purposes of the golf course utility, aren't the only numbers that matter year to year revenue versus costs? I mean, you have a system which I'll talk about later, but which would propose to retire the old debt by 2018, 2019.
2018,
But then
yeah.
going forward, year to year, if the revenues aren't sufficient to cover the cost of the golf course, and when I say cost, I mean obviously operating costs plus what you need to put in for capital improvements, plus your debt service on the $700,000 you're proposing to borrow, if the revenues don't cover it, aren't your only two options further borrowing or turning to the city to make good on any shortfall, or to fund any capital improvements that aren't fundable through revenues from the course?
Okay, in this proposal, at the end of 19, there's $304,000 in cash on hand in the nonprofit that would be used to pay off debt service. The following year, it would generate another $165,000. So as the next few years go by, in theory, if all things stay the same or relatively the same, it could pay off the city's debt service and what it borrowed by 2021.
Okay. Now, in the proposal, in the first 5 years, there is no provision for any capital improvement spending, right?
Correct.
All right. So if there's going to be capital improvements under the not-for-profit, they're not going to be fundable until at least year 6 and maybe later.
No, the not-for-profit would borrow the money for the capital improvements, and that would be spread out over the future years, just like you would if you did it.
All right. So additional borrowing.
Yes.
Could you explain how that line of credit would work? Because I know when we talk about borrowing typically with the city, we think about bonding out, but this seems to me like it'd be more in line with like a business line of credit.
This is
Business
Andy's
line of
propo-
credit is like a home equity loan, same thing. You know, as you would just pay interest payments on it. You would open up the checking account with the amount of the line of credit, and it gets swept in and out every day. If you put $1,000 in there, it pays down your line of credit $1,000. If you write a check for $500, it gets swept out of your line of credit to cover the $500 check.
okay, any other discussion by council?
Are we talking about just discussion with Mr. Costello or discussion generally before we go to public?
Well, generally, or with Mr. Costello, however you would like it.
I don't know if he had been freed or not.
Well, I think he's staying,
Yeah, I'm still here.
in case the public has questions.
We'll give him food.
Okay, well, because excuse me, Mayor. I did prepare a handout which I would like to share with the members of council. And there are copies, or there were copies on the table for anybody from the public who wanted to see. Thank you.
$300,000 is nice to the city. It doesn't pay.
Right. I know there weren't enough to go around, but please feel free to look on with somebody who does have a copy. What I prepared is a single page, which I've called a bottom line comparison of the proposal by Ron Jaworski Golf versus a not-for-profit. And I just deal with two broad brush aspects of it, economics and intangibles. I've set up columns for the Ron Jaworski Golf proposal, broken down years 1 through 5, years 6 through 10, and years 11 through 15, and comparable information for the not-for-profit. Ron Jaworski Golf in years 1 through 5 guarantees, actually let me back up a second. My focus, and I think the only focus that matters, is on the bottom line to Brigantine. What is going to generate the best financial position for Brigantine without incurring risk, which I think is a key factor, and I'll talk about in a second in the intangibles. But just in terms of the dollars, and remember the Jaworski dollars are guaranteed dollars. These aren't speculative dollars depending on how the course performs or anything else. This is what's in his proposal financially. In years 1 through 5, payments will total, this is guaranteed lease payments, will total $250,000. He is guaranteeing at least $300,000 in capital investment. That's $550,000. I've backed out of that $151,000 attributable to county taxes over that period. Now, we've heard tonight that there's a very good chance that our course is substantially overassessed, and I would strongly recommend that if the assessor, in fact, has not made that correction that Fred Cerny talked about earlier, based on the discussions between Mr. Cerny and our representative from the reval company and our assessor, that the city should appeal those taxes to get that total value down where it ought to be. But I'm going with a high number of 151. So in years 1 through 5, that nets out to $399,000 in value. In years 6 through 10, guaranteed payments of $500,000. Guaranteed capital investment minimum of $200,000. Again, backing out the county taxes, netting you $549,000. Years 11 through 15 in the Jaworski proposal would be the same financially as years 6 through 10. In the not-for-profit, years 1 through 5, there are no guaranteed lease or comparable payments. That number is a 0. There is no, again, referring to the proposal which is attached, there is no guaranteed capital investment. That number is a 0. There is a payment of $1,155,125 to debt service. But I'm backing out from that the new borrowing because, as Councilman Picardi has pointed out, and I think quite aptly, we're borrowing money under this proposal to pay off borrowed money. That's no net gain to the city because, remember, in this structure, the city is responsible, ultimately responsible. If operations from the course under a not-for-profit don't cover operating expenses, aren't sufficient to pay for capital improvements, aren't sufficient to pay for your borrowing, that the not-for-profit's borrowing, that is absolutely 100% on the taxpayers. They will be responsible for it. So I'm backing that number out so that your year 1 through 5 net under the not-for-profit is $455,000. In years 6 through 10 under the not-for-profit, again, there are no guaranteed payments to the city. There's no guaranteed capital investment. Same in years 11 through 15. And I keep saying the word guaranteed because it's an important word. What matters is what is guaranteed. We may be optimistic, we may speculate that things will go well, we may be confident that we, whoever is running a not-for-profit, will be able to cut costs, would be able to generate more revenues. None of that is promised to you. That absolutely is not a promise. Nobody's making that a promise, and nobody's making it a guarantee. The intangibles. Number one intangible, I've been talking about this for 2 years, is risk. Under the Jaworski proposal from day one, all risk of losses, deficits, and capital costs is solely borne by Ron Jaworski Golf. Now, whether that's for a 5-year term, a 10-year term, or a 15-year term, that holds true throughout the term. They, and not the city, are responsible for all the risks. Under the not-for-profit, from day one, any costs which can't be paid from the course revenues will be borne by the city. It's as simple as that. There's only two players in that equation. It's the not-for-profit and it's the city. If the course is not generating enough money to pay its obligations, the city is on the hook, and the city means the taxpayers. In terms of organization, Ron Jaworski Golf, they're established professionals. They own, as we heard from Mr. Galvin, I thought he made a very nice presentation and articulated the benefits that Ron Jaworski brings and can bring to the city. They have a regional presence, they have marketing expertise, and they have capital resources. The NFP has no other courses and will have no capital resources other than what the city provides it or what it's able to generate through ongoing operations. We don't know anything concrete at this point about the proposed structure or the membership. Now, in preparing that summary, I took at face value, because until tonight, I had no information about the proposed cost savings that would be realized annually under the not-for-profit. First time tonight I'm hearing about these. I have questions about a number of them, and there's a few of them which I think you got to take off the table. Water paid to the city, $40,000, which under the not-for-profit would not be paid to the city. That's $40,000 of cost to the city. You can't back that out simply to make your bottom line look better. You're taking that money from the city. That's no different than extra borrowing. It's not a real savings, certainly to the city. The not-for-profit is just a shell. It's an entity. The city is the financially responsible party. If you're saying to the city, we're not going to pay you that $40,000, that is absolutely coming right out of the taxpayer's pocket. I don't think that's a valid reduction in your projected costs. Professional fees, we talked about up here. You know, I don't see it. I just don't see where you're going to get that. We have no data, no information about the proposed $40,000 savings in payroll. I can't take that at face value. Electric, the $17,000, proposed that it would be paid by the food and beverage operator. I'm not sure where that assumption comes from and why we are expected to assume that we can save $17,000 on electric because there will be a food and beverage operator willing to pay that. And even if they are, then where we also talked about, or I should say Councilman Simpson, talked about the fact that no food and beverage was included in his projections. I don't see a food and beverage operator, especially given what Mr. Galvin said about the fact that it's more of an amenity than anything else at this particular course, paying the $17,000 for electric and something over and above that for the privilege of being there. So I think these are very, very questionable assumptions in terms of your ability to reduce costs in year one and then to continue that going forward, because things do cost more over time. That, I don't think you need to be a business expert to realize that. And as far as the revenues, I think it is a different situation when, you know, if I was a business person doing a pro forma and going to the bank, I might very well project that I'm going to have increasing revenues over time. Except that this is an asset, there's two major differences. The first and biggest is that if I, as a businessman, am going to a lender with a pro forma seeking some kind of financing, that's my money at risk. That's my skin in the game. It's not the case with a not-for-profit. With a not-for-profit, you know, feel free to indulge any crazy assumptions you want, because in the end, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't play out, if you've grossly overstated income or understated projected costs, it's on the taxpayers. It's not 1 cent coming out of anybody else's pocket. So that's one major difference. And the other major difference is that when you look at this particular course and this particular industry in our region, and Mr. Galvin also touched on this, and I thought he covered it very well, and it's not something new. We've been talking about this for 2 years. We have all seen the numbers. Revenues have been on the decline. It's not that they've been stable. It's not that they've been creeping upward. They have been on the decline throughout the year 2013, because that was an anomaly post-Sandy. But 2014 revenues substantially below those of 2012, the last full, that wasn't even a full year. That was a year where you lost 2 months. And even then, 2014 revenues were below that. You can't assume, I won't assume, because I've been put up here with a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers. I am not going to put on a happy face and assume that our revenues are going to climb and that our costs are going to stay, we're going to be able to reduce them and keep them down. To me, those are reckless assumptions. It all comes back to risk. Ron Jaworski's and there's not a universe of different things we're looking at here. There are two proposals. There's a proposal from Ron Jaworski, and there's us running it. Whether it's a not-for-profit or anything else, they're your two choices. In the one, you have somebody who's going to step in, and over the life of this, if he goes for the 15 years, is going to generate positive cash for the city. You have no guarantees at all. On the other side, maybe it works out, but if it doesn't, that's on you. That to me is, I'm not going to play games with taxpayers' money like that. That's an irresponsible risk that I don't think is worth taking at all.
Okay, Rick, you're sitting here and telling me there's guarantees from 6 to 10. Well, you know Mr. Jaworski, only Mr. Jaworski can extend his lease. So there's no guarantees from 6 to 10, years 6 to 10. So we have to look at the first 5 years, Rick. Speaking of no skin in the game, Mr. Jaworski has no skin in the game. We're the one financing him, so he has no skin in the game. The water bill, Ed, does the Rams pay their water bill when we water the football field? Does the softball fields when they water that? You know, any other amenities that the city of Brigantine owns, do we charge them for the water bill?
No, none of our recreation complexes.
Thank you. So you can't go from, you know, guarantee, these are guaranteed numbers, then over on the other side, there's no guaranteed numbers. So Mr. Jaworski, under his one-page proposal, doesn't say any of that. And we asked him to clarify. He doesn't say, what's the $300,000? He doesn't say what he's going to put it into. It's a one-page, one-line item. That's all there is. When we try to get a hold of him, you know, I wish I had more information. But we got to move on, people. We're losing $7,500 a month on a fee that we shouldn't be doing right now. So we have to make a decision. I agree with Rick on one thing. We've been talking about it for 2 years, and if this was such a great idea, I don't know why the previous administration didn't vote on it and pass it at that particular time. So they had the votes. They had 5-2. So go ahead.
I'm just curious, and Rick, and I appreciate you putting this, on paper and taking the time to analyze it. The one area that I'm not seeing is the cost to the taxpayers years 1 through 5 and under the two proposals. And the way that I look at it, taking all into account, the cost per taxpayers would be anywhere from $750,000 to $800,000 under the Jaworski proposal, and it would be zero according to the projections that we've been given by the nonprofit. Now, it's important, too, over the next couple of years, because we'll be fully funding the debt service in our budget as well. So we will be responsible for inserting that $400,000 or approximately $400,000 in those budgets for the next 2 years with no offset in revenue. But once again, I appreciate your due diligence in putting this together, but the bottom line is, what is the cost to the taxpayers over the next couple of years, and then beyond that, of course, is important as well.
Oh, Phil, hold on. Let's not just dismiss that last part. Beyond that's important as well. The not-for-profit proponents, present a snapshot of 5 years, because within that 5 years, you can come up with a scheme through borrowing and through assumptions, which I think are very
first of all,
questionable.
no. When you say scheme there, Rick, you're being a little dishonest there, Rick.
No, right, Andy, it's not dishonest.
There's no guarantee Mr. Jaworski is going to, after 5 years, lease the course again. There's no guarantee on that. So you have to use a snapshot of the first 5 years. And I didn't fluff the numbers. I didn't do any of that kind of thing. I made them very conservative numbers, as the taxpayers will lose $1,056,000. If after 2 years the nonprofit doesn't work, it's not going to hurt my feeling. We'll put it out for RFP again and see what happens. Because
anybody come
you know what?
after it?
But you guys are sitting here saying that the nonprofit's not going to make it. It's going to be a burden on the taxpayers. Well, if that's the case, Mr. Jaworski's not going to make it either. So then the taxpayers lost $1,055,000, and then they're going to get the course back in disrepair, and then we're going to have to put more money into it. So
Right.
I think the snapshot of the first 5 years is the most relative piece of this
Okay.
contract we should be looking at.
Right, and Andy, if you want to do that, if you want to do the snapshot of just the first 5 years, you can't ignore the $700,000 that's being borrowed. That's not revenue generated as not-for-profit. That's not founder invested money. That's money
That's
that taxpayers-
$700,000, or that's,
In
if we
year-
closed up shop, the city would have to pay the $700,000. You're guaranteed $1,055,000. That's why you have a profit here of $455,000, because that's the loss between what the city's, what the nonprofit is going to pay to the city and what the guaranteed loss of Jaworski deal is.
Right.
You know,
Hey, Rick?
if the not-for-profit doesn't work, nobody is going to come in and bid on this for any reason. But if the Jaworski doesn't work, a not-for-profit can still come in. But the reverse will not hold true.
And if you want to look at, again, just the first 5 years,
So we lost
if
$1,055,000.
you back out the
then we'll do
$700,000,
the nonprofit.
Andy, if you back out the $700,000, you've got $455,000 generated to the plus by not-for-profit. If you put the $40,000 of water costs that you want to ignore back into the equation, then the Jaworski proposal is better by about $100,000 over the first 5 years.
No, it's not.
No,
No
yes,
way.
it is. Because he's paying for water.
A question,
But what is he paying? What is he paying on capital improvements? We're still in the same situation. We don't know what that $300,000
At
means.
least $300,000,
Here's,
at least.
Well,
here's
you-
what we do know,
you know,
Andy.
you-
The not-for-profit has
Everybody,
zero capital
when we
improvement.
started this, we were slapping our hands on the table, or not me, but the other people, were slapping our hands on the table. We're going to force people to put $2.5 million in our golf course. Now we're down to $300,000 and a losing lease. And
Because of the
we just
market.
keep going backwards. Every time we asked Mr. Jaworski, we went from $500,000 in 4 years. Then he comes back with, here's my best and final one. He went from 500 in 4 years to 300 in 5 years. So we lost 200 grand there, plus another year.
Well, the golf industry itself is
We're
in decline.
we're
He's not
losing
gonna
just
expand.
talking to the guy.
Yeah.
The other
yeah.
thing that we know is that, and I keep going back to this, that there is no food and beverage revenue in this operation. And I don't know what the numbers look like, but I can tell you anecdotally, golf course does okay with the number of events and banquets it has, but it is not an aggressive operation to try and bring those types of events to the golf course. Perhaps another vendor in there, someone else operating that would do much better in the food and beverage area. And the other thing I want to mention too is, and I'm not a golfer, but I do live on the golf course, and I can tell you that the residents who surround the golf course they know that it is a city-owned course. It is not just a golf course. It is used, although not sanctioned for that use, but to police it would be a rather heavy burden, and it is used for other uses, and I can tell you that by looking out my back door. I don't know whether that continues under a private operator going forward, with people walking their dogs and sledding and
So the rest of the city
football
has to,
games.
the rest of the city is subsidizing so people around the golf course can walk their dogs on the golf course and
Well,
go sleigh riding.
Joe, I don't know how you
We're
draw
subsidizing the dog park.
Joe, I don't know how you draw a conclusion like that, but I will tell you this, since you opened the door. The golf course had about 24,000 rounds. What I'm
How
being
many
told
were
is
paid
about
for?
27 to 30% of those rounds are played by people who are residents or property owners. So when you do the math on that, you have, let's say, roughly between 7,000 and 8,000 times residents or taxpayers are using a recreational asset. I'd like to ask you if there are any other recreational asset the city of Brigantine owns that has that amount of use by its residents. It's not the tennis courts. It's certainly not the football field and the baseball fields and the soccer fields. We don't have,
How about the
when you
beach?
look at those numbers, you have thousands of residents, thousands of times a resident has gone out and used that facility, or a taxpayer going forward. So yeah, it is important that all residents of Brigantine, because probably not all of them live on the golf course, but that all residents of Brigantine do have access to it, and it remains an affordable course for people to use. The other point that I was going to make, and you may not agree on this, we do have a golf course master plan, but I can tell you right now that you could open up the golf course next year, turn the key on the golf course, and you might have to do some maintenance on the sprinkler system and perhaps do some other general maintenance, but I don't see where you need to put millions of dollars into the golf course over the next year or possibly even over the next 5 years. So I go back to the maximum exposure that Mr. Jaworski has is $300,000. That's not a minimum, that's a maximum for him. And there are a number of ways that capital improvements can be done. There are a number of ways that general improvements and maintenance can be done over time. In fact, I think our present operators have done a good job with some of those things working through our groundskeeper and the things that are done on a daily basis. But when I look at this proposal, I see one thing. Under one proposal, the taxpayers are guaranteed to spend anywhere between $800,000 and $1 million to pay the debt service. Under the other proposal, could be zero if it works. And there's no guarantee it's going to work, and I understand that. But when you look at the difference between the two, I think it's important to give it a chance as an entity, and also I believe that having residents and taxpayers have input into how the course is operated and where it goes in the future is vitally important as well.
And don't forget, it's probably the only asset that Brigantine has where OPM, other people's money, has paid for it. Now, I understand the taxpayers have paid so far about $1 million on a $4 million asset, but right now the golfers pay for the course. Nobody paid for the football field but the taxpayers. Nobody paid for the baseball field but the taxpayers.
$675,000 we paid this year? That didn't come from the golfers.
Joe, if you listen to what I say to you, I said they paid about $1 million so far on a $4 million asset. That's including the payment this year.
No, it's not a $4 million, it's probably a 1.3.
You bought it for $4 million, Joe.
But it's not worth that now.
Well, neither's my house. I mean, it's still an asset. It's like the pool. My pool got wiped out by Sandy. I didn't want the pool in the first place, but it was my asset, so I had to fix it. I had to put $20,000 into my pool. I didn't want to do it, but I had to. If somebody else was willing to give me $20,000 to fix my pool, I would take it. So it's our asset, Joe. That's what it costs in 2002.
It's also our liability.
Yeah. It always will be our liability.
I jump in for a second?
Sure.
I think the major thing that I hear, and obviously from a lot of sides of this issue, is this question of liability. I think everyone here, everyone who's in this room, everyone sitting here, and everyone watching at home is concerned about where that liability is going to end up. And, I look at the proposals, I look at the side-by-side, we see here it says risk from day one, all risk of loss, deficits, and capital costs will solely be borne by Ron Jaworski. And I have to ask, do we have that in writing from Mr. Jaworski that he will accept all of that risk? And my understanding right now is that we don't. Now, I'll tell you, I've negotiated a lot of contracts in my day. I've never once agreed to a contract that someone hasn't spelled out the terms. So right now, I'm telling you, as I'm looking at this, I'm being told that someone will accept that responsibility. But I live in a world that if it's not in writing, it's not real. And we've all, and I can't tell you, we've all been burned by contracts that you expected one thing and somebody didn't hold up to our expectation. So if it's not spelled out and it's not writing, how do you agree to it? And if someone's not willing to tell you what they're willing to do and how they're willing to...
In order to get to that stage, we need to...
Hang on, so Mr. Riccardi, I've always let people finish, and I make it a point not to cut people off, so I ask for the same courtesy. If somebody is not willing to spell out what their risk, what their exposure, and what they're going to spend, there has to be a reason. There has to be a reason. So I don't think that to be responsible that I can be asked to commit to something that somebody's not going to spell out. And that's my concern. So when we say that they're going to accept all that risk, I don't see where that's at. I see that that's kind of a wish in the sky that they're going to do that.
Let
I
me,
think we're,
we haven't gotten to that point yet of spelling out, crossing every T and dotting every I, and we won't get there unless we accept the baseline proposal, and then we go into the minutia.
well,
And-
I think that's how we got the Affordable Care Act.
To be,
Mr. Galvin is, let's hear from Mr. Galvin.
Sign it, we'll sign it and read it later?
to be, can you hear me okay on this one? To be fair to the Jaworski Group, first of all, they put in a very detailed, more than one page, very detailed proposal, which included personal financial information that was very significant. And that's not publicly disclosed, but it's in the binders all of you have. We asked for a second proposal called the price proposal, which was purely the financial, so that you could look at the technical proposal, make a judgment on are they qualified before opening the price proposal, then to see the high or low bids, to try to separate the two decisions, so to speak. So to be fair to them, it wasn't a one-pager. It was a very detailed thing with personal financial information. And
Matt, this is what you brought us the first time around.
that's the pricing proposal. The technical proposal is the
Well,
yellow
you
binder,
know,
the orange binder.
you
But
know,
I just want to be fair
Personal
to,
financials and business financials, that's all fine and
Well,
dandy. But this was the proposal.
that's the
What?
financial proposal. If there was a $2 million check in there, it would only be one page, but it would still be worth something. So I don't mean to
Maybe.
be flippant.
Certified.
But I want to be fair to them and all, they're not here to defend themselves, but the second issue
Did you ask
is,
him to come, Matt?
yes, I did, but
And what happened?
I think they feel the ball's in our court to respond to their proposal.
So they're not here to
The-
answer questions.
So the other point I want to make to defend them is they made a proposal, they responded to an RFP that did clearly state, these would be your responsibilities, this would be reflected in the lease. It was all very clear, but we never got to that point. So to your point, Councilman Sarah, it would have been detailed, it would have been airtight. The city has council legal representation to make sure it would have been done, and they either would have done it or they wouldn't. But I don't think it's fair to them to say it was vague and they were trying to hide something, and, you know, there was, I just don't think that was fair.
Well,
So I had to-
what's fair to them is that they have not had a conversation with you since, when's the last time you spoke to them?
It's about a month or so that we asked, you know, if they wanted to sharpen their pencil again, and they just wanted to let it,
That was
So-
long
Yeah,
before
right.
a month ago.
and their
That was last year.
their last position was that their proposal still stands, the deposit's still in your hands, they still, you want to move forward. You know, we were the ones that probed and asked them to sharpen the pencil and raise the issue of a shorter term. They originally proposed, met our proposal of the 24-year term. They might be willing to go back to that. So I'm just trying to be fair to them. They're not here to defend that, and I think it's you know, it wasn't a one-pager. It was a very detailed thing, and I felt that needed to be said.
And for the audience's benefit, the members of council were advised by our attorney of exactly the position that Jaworski had most recently taken, which is that they needed to see something from council before they would invest the further effort and resources and energy in sitting down and negotiating an actual contract. They needed to see that we wanted to give them not something binding, because it would not be a legally binding contract. If we voted right now to go ahead with the Jaworski proposal, that means only that we've authorized our attorney and whomever else to sit down with their representatives and see if they can fashion a contract that would be brought back to council, and it would be the contract that would be voted on. That's where they left it. So let's not have any lingering impressions that because they're not here, that somehow that should be held against them. They made it very clear to us what it was that they needed to see from us. You don't have to do that, but I see absolutely no downside in doing it.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to open the meeting for public comment. Yes, I want to remind everyone before we start on the public comment, we have a 5-minute limit on comments, so please try and sum your comments up if you can with that time frame in mind. Also, when you speak, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
And Phil,
Steve?
are we going to try to limit it to the content, that it's going to be financial?
Yeah, it's for the golf course, yes.
Hi, my name's Steve Cordasco. I'm a resident of 560 West Shore. I'm on the board of advisory board of First Colonial Community Bank. I'm an adjunct professor, math and finance at Temple University, and I have three businesses, the West Shore Group, which is a mutual fund company, Cardasco Financial Network, which is a boutique investment firm, and Wisdom Planning, which is a fee-only planning company. And I'm also on some nonprofits, so I know in full diligence that Andy and Phil and members of council, some of them have called on me to ask about what it was like setting up nonprofits for Christ the King School in Haddonfield, which was going to be, had threatened to be taken over, and we were able to form a nonprofit to try to save that institution. Doug Corbett's here. We did some work at the Yacht Club. I'm a member at the Yacht Club. My 5 children. My wife's on the board there, the trustees. And we worked together to begin the process of trying to do a nonprofit. And my advice to those that asked is that the interesting thing about a nonprofit is that it's transparent. It's open. And those on boards, like I'm on a board of a nonprofit, you go to jail if you're not honest and you don't audit and you don't open your books. So when I got asked to give input, I thought, wow, this is interesting. First time government is asking to be open and give full diligence and transparency. So I gave some input to that. I spend most of my life, day in and day out, doing risk analysis, investing people's money and wanting to know what's the return and what's the risk. And from what I can gather from this, it looks like this comes down to a risk scenario. So the first thing I ask is, what's the credit rating of Ron Jaworski? Because we don't have the details. So, Matt, right, is it? So if I'm at the bank, they're asking whether we should lend money to an auto dealership or a REIT or a house on West Shore Drive. We want to know what the quality rating of that individual is. Now, I'd rather not say here. I know enough about South Jersey people with big names and money and where they stand and where we would lend money, who we'd lend money to. In your opinion, Ron Jaworski, would you consider him, if he was a bond, a junk bond or a quality bond?
Well, all I can say is that they provided personal financial information, tax return information in the proposals on a non-public basis to the full board to make their decision. And so I can't comment on that personally.
But we can't, as tax-paying citizens that have to make a decision here or give input to council, he's not giving that to us.
Well, I don't think any person's balance sheet would match the balance sheet of the city of Brigantine on an individual basis. At the end of the day,
Yeah, but we're not comparing it to the city of Brigantine, the balance sheet.
aren't you?
No, I don't think so.
Isn't that the other ultimate person standing, the ultimate enemy standing behind the club now, or even under the not-for-profit?
Well, the city of Brigantine's books are wide open.
No, I'm saying.
And I would tell you that the rating of Brigantine, we'll have a beer over it. I would bet you it's probably higher than Ron, would you think?
That's what I'm saying. You're trying to compare an individual to a city. There's two different things.
Then we can compare it to a nonprofit, which is open transparency, but yet we don't have transparency with a private entity, correct?
No, what you would most likely have to negotiate is either a guarantee or a security deposit.
But we can't do that yet. Why?
The process hasn't gone that far forward yet.
But in all due respect to Mr. Picardi and Rick, frankly, when I enter into a deal, I don't sign a piece of paper saying that I'm going to do the deal. I would go back to Mr. Jaworski and say, we spent how much for your work? The taxpayers paid you?
$13,700.
I think $13,000 is enough skin in the game as a taxpayer that pays a fair amount of tax at 560 West Shore to say, we're pretty serious about this, Mr. Jaworski. So I think that should suffice us to say, we're serious about you.
Well, I think that another way to phrase it is if you want to rent an apartment and they want $1,000 a month and you want to offer $500, the landlord's not going to send you a lease to negotiate if you're not even on the same page. So I think that's...
No, that's not, you can't, no.
Well, I think that's exactly it. They don't even know if their offer's even acceptable to the city. And what would normally happen if let's take...
Well, let's back up. So what's happening, because I get solicited a lot by businesses. So right now, a lot of consolidation is going on in the golf industry. A lot of when the industry took off prior to 08, and you had, a lot of money chasing the golf industry, there was pyramid going on, meaning you buy, and just like banks were, First Union went under doing that, and the big banking operations did this. My concern is that Mr. Jaworski is doing some pyramiding here. There's, how many courses does he own versus what he leases?
Well, he operates 4, I believe he owns Valley Brook, Running Deer, and Blue Heron, and I'm not sure if he leases the 4th one.
Right, so what happens when you have ownership, there tends to be a little bit more passion to the ownership side. So my concern is that he'll fleece us, the taxpayers here in Brigantine, because really, it comes down to $250,000. If he wants to walk away from this thing, it's $250,000. That's his lease agreement. I got to tell you, the lawyers alone, Brigantine's going to say, hey, look, for us to fight this thing, it's going to cost us $200,000 in legal fees. I'm afraid we're going to have, just like you brought up real estate and a tenant situation, we're going to have a tenant we can't get rid of because it's going to cost us more than what it's going to take to get him out of there. So to me, that's a big concern as a taxpayer. And just as somebody who's been asked to give some input and to help, the difference between nonprofit, which is transparency, and a private individual who I question where he stands today financially because he's bitten off a lot, and whether or not he's going to take his lease structure here at Brigantine, which has profit tied into it, right? We all looked at the profit part, and that profit then goes to where his ownership interests are and not back to where Brigantine is. Now, if you look at a nonprofit, where does Rick, where would a nickel earn? Let's say the golf course earns a nickel. As somebody, you sound like you know nonprofits, where would that nickel go?
It would stay with the nonprofit.
It has to go within the property, right? So if...
No, it stays with the nonprofit. It doesn't have to be reinvested into the
no,
property.
let's walk through it. So the bylaws of that nonprofit, when we set it up with lawyers, will be set up that it has to go back to the golf course, correct? It's not going to go to Steve Cordasco or Mike Brennan, although he wants to back there. Listen, to get the IRS code, to be able to be a nonprofit, you have to be very, 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 very specific on where those dollars go.
I'm familiar with that, but...
Okay,
the-
so
let's
if you
make
are
sure we're
familiar
saying-
with
let's
it,
make
then
sure
you
we're saying
can't
the
say
same
it's not
thing.
going to go to something other than the definition of the nonprofit.
I didn't say that, and I'm not assuming and never did assume that monies generated over and above operating costs would go into any individual's pocket or would be used to compensate members of the board of directors. The money would have to stay with the not-for-profit.
Right.
Now, the distinction, though, is that that money would not necessarily have to be reinvested in capital or other improvements. That money can simply be held and carried forward as a surplus and may be used to offset losses in future years.
Yep.
It has to be used for the purposes of not-for-profit.
So beautiful. So probably something that would be more constructive of an argument here tonight would be to try to find out really what Mr. Jaworski would be quality-wise as somebody that the citizens have to backstop, that I have to backstop. And then the other part would be, in all fairness, how do we set up the bylaw of a nonprofit if that's the direction we go? Meaning, if a nickel is earned, does a nickel define what it goes towards? Whether it's irrigation, whether it's beautifying, whether it's maintenance. Because if the nickel doesn't go there, whether you're on the board, Rick, or Mr. Brennan's on the board, or Mr. Corbett's on the board, we'll leave him out of it because he's asleep back there. But whoever is on the board is responsible. They can lose their property. They can spend time in jail. And the IRS is soothing on this stuff. They're after it.
That's understood, but it's also off the point. The point is not that people, if they are guilty of some form of malfeasance in their capacity as a director of the not-for-profit, might face criminal sanctions because they might very well. The starting point really is that we do not know, as we sit here today, what is the proposed structure of the not-for-profit, and we don't know what its proposed would be in the bylaws and whether there would be provisions of the type you're describing in terms of how the money would be, or has to be allocated should there be excess over costs.
Right. So I think it'd be more constructive as a citizen for at least, it seems like there's a lot of fighting here over specifics, but I have nobody say, hey, why don't we really take a look at the nonprofit? Why don't we ask Mr. Jaworski to show up? We spent $13,000. At least give us a little bit of respect to just show up to the meeting. I mean, I drove here an hour with a snowstorm coming today.
If I can add 2 things. One is, you mentioned maintenance. In the RFP and what would have been reflected in the lease are very detailed maintenance specifications down to how often you have to mow, what height is, all that kind of stuff. So there would be hours of operation requirements, very detailed specifications on what's required to maintain the golf course. I have to tell you, and I don't have a dog in the hunt, if the city leases it or doesn't lease it, that's their decision. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not even an Eagles fan. I'm a Patriots fan. I'm from Boston.
No, but you've
But-
done business with Mr.
but-
Jaworski, and you guys are friends.
Well, we haven't
Right.
done business together, but.
But he
I'm not the
bought one of your companies. His
No,
company
no,
bought-
I sold it to another gentleman who then lost it, and then he bought it from the bank after that. But I do feel compelled to say, I know them through the industry. His wife Liz, who runs a business, their son BJ, and to hear, the words pyramiding and fleecing and whatnot, it doesn't reflect anything I know about them and their operation.
I didn't say anything illegal. Pyramiding, layering it's called, is something that many businesses do. It doesn't mean it's
Well, I was part of a group-
illegal.
I was part of a group that took 40 courses, took the company public, raised $200 million, grew it to 300 courses, and I would call it synergy. We bought cheaper fertilizer than anybody else. We bought food and beverage cheaper than anybody else. We marketed better than people. We did it together. And, there's synergies in doing that together, and I think that's one of the things that they try to apply here.
And banks like First Union try to create synergies, and none of them are here today because they were trying to do it. But anyway, with all due respect, thank you. I think it'd be nice to get more transparency on each side and be able to really look at, what's best for the citizens. And if it is a nonprofit, at least that's transparency and get real defining of what it can do. Hey, if $40,000 is paid to water, that leaves an extra $100,000 left over, if the numbers are right, for the nonprofit. That $100,000 has to go somewhere. It's not going to go to another course that's owned. It's not going to buy another course.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, Mr. Shea.
Gary Shea, 17 Mark Lane. Listen, first of all, there just seems to be an awful lot of questions still on both sides, right? I mean, on this side, it's nice the way you guys got that set up too.
Okay.
We do the wave later or something. But you guys have a lot of questions for Mr. Jaworski over on this side, correct?
He won't talk to us.
I will, stop the comments. You have questions, okay? Now, from what I understand the procedure is, as Matt stated it,
Sign it and we'll read it later.
why don't we do this then? Why don't we find the middle ground here? Because the middle ground is simply this. However you do it legislatively, let's agree that we need at least a meeting with Mr. Jaworski, correct?
Gary,
And we
Gary,
need,
this has been going on months.
and we need to see who's going to be running this board. Because let me remind you of something, okay? You mentioned the city's going to lose $1 million if Jaworski comes in. You already lost that money. That money's lost. That money was lost from the initial purchase of the golf course. In 2009, this golf course, the revenue of the golf course dropped $300,000. From 2010 to 2012, it dropped another $225,000. Okay? You could say 13 was anomaly, 14 went down. But here's my point. It's 2015, and you still don't have a resolution to this issue.
Don't forget, when they lost the $300,000, that's because we lost the food and beverage.
No, that was the next year. That was the next year. But let me just ask you one other question, and it was. And,
How
and
much did we lose off of that? What was the revenue off of food and beverage?
I don't know. All I know is
you
the
know
revenue
all
off
the
the golf
numbers.
course. The golf course revenue dropped $300,000 at that point. When you still had food and beverage. Now, here's the thing. All right? I've been very consistent on this from the very beginning, okay? And the discussion is pretty much proof of it. This is a fairly complicated business, all right? I have people approach me every day, well, not every day, I won't exaggerate, but at least a couple of times a year telling me how to deal about this golf course and a deal about that. Do I have $500,000 do I put up? Do I have $750,000 I could put up? And I'm not going to touch a golf course in this market. Wouldn't touch one. It's not a good investment right now. It's very tough. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Jaworski's proposal is basically saying that to you. All right, look, hey, if you make it easy for me, I'll come in here. But otherwise, it's not that great of a deal. But at the same time, what you're trying to tell me is that you guys want to be the owners again. And you have to understand that you have a general manager and I think somebody who's pretty good at it. Okay, about the only person I could think of could be better is the other guy stand back there that used to do it. So here's the deal. If you want to be the owners again, let me give you an ownership issue, and you give me an answer. You have 2 pumps, irrigation pumps on that golf course right now that are well over 20 years old, maybe 25 years old, all right? The manufacturer is no longer part of this planet. There are no spare parts. When it goes, and it will, and I'm sure you didn't think of this when you said it, but you said, Phil, you sat here and said, I don't see anything big come up in the next 5 years. This is going to happen in the next 5 years. This is going to happen. You are buying time like you've never borrowed time before in your life. And here's your other problem, that once those pumps go, you got 20-year-old PVC pipe over there that's popping springs leaks as it is right now. You hook up a new set of pumps to that 20-year-old PVC pipe, okay? You're going to have the world's largest sprinkler system. You're going to forget about golf. You're going to be charging kids to run through the water and have fun, all right? So you want to be the owners of the golf course. Why is there no mention in the proposal here about now and when you're going to replace that sprinkler system? Because you realize by the time you pull the old one out and go to work, you're going to lose 4 months. 4 months of this revenue that, you know, I think is kind of questionable there, but I'm not going to argue over the numbers and all that stuff. This is a real problem. This is a problem an owner has to deal with. The general manager comes to him and says, you got to replace the sprinkler system. It's got to be done now. So how are we going to do that?
And who's going to replace it for Mr. Jaworski?
I'm not talking about Mr. Jaworski. I'm talking about you. You want to be the owners. How are you going to do it? Tell me how you're going to do it.
First, calm down. We'll talk. You know, Gary, it's this, I wanted to make it apples to apples. Mr. Jaworski's not paying for it. There's no way in hell he's paying for it.
Andy, forget Mr. Jaworski for a minute.
It's
Tell me
apples to apples.
how you're going to do it.
It's apples to apples.
Because you know if that...
You
if the
just said,
sprinkler-
you
the
just said
sprinkler
it's
system goes,
going to
he's
be
gonna-
down for 4 months, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Jaworski isn't paying his rent for the
Andy,
4 months.
forget about Mr. Jaworski for a minute.
No, it's apples to apples.
Andy, I like your idea.
Gary.
I like your idea. So you tell me, with your idea, how you would handle that situation. And it's not a situation. This is
It
not
would be
something
it'd be
that could
the
use
same-
speculation.
It would be the same way we would handle it for Mr. Jaworski or the nonprofit.
But why not handle it now?
Well, Gary, let me go
Because it's
back
$1 million.
Because it's not, but it's not, I know it's $1 million. That's my point. And if it goes...
5 minutes are up.
If it goes...
Your time's up.
I'd like Mr.
Time.
Gunther.
Phil to say what he
Mr.
wants
Phil.
to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's the
yeah.
mayor. Yeah, he can say.
For whatever reason, you seem to be able to predict the future that this is definitely going to happen, and that it's going to happen tomorrow, and that this sprinkler system will need to be replaced. But what I would do as the nonprofit is, and as the city of Brigantine, I would defer to the experts, in this case our city engineer, who happens to be our city manager right now, but also I want to say one thing. This RFP process, as far as I am concerned, and was concerned at the time it went out, is a flawed process because it has no minimum standards. And remember, I sat here through all the discussion.
Can I stop you?
Let me finish.
Yeah, but I agree with you.
5 minutes are up.
But I agree with you.
But
okay?
it did have minimum
No, but
standards.
let me finish the minimum standard issue. The biggest issue that I heard was that the golf course had declining revenue, and the golf course had put away enough money during the good years and was able to sustain the operation until last year, and the impact of Superstorm Sandy and some bad budgeting, I might add. In fact, the cost of the golf course wasn't what was budgeted. It was less than that. But with that said, if the goal was to relieve the burden from the taxpayers, that should have been put in the RFP, that at a minimum, that the person coming in, responding to the RFP, knew that they had to pay the debt service for the first so many years. If that was the goal, that was the stated goal. That didn't happen. We also have the same issue that you're talking about. We don't know the answer to that because Mr. Jaworski has not defined what that means. And I can't imagine that looking at the golf master plan, he's going to go into a deal in a market that you say is as bad as it is, and there's a potential that in the first year, if we believe the $1 million number for the sprinkler system, that he's going to be on the hook for if he puts his 300 in, $700,000 in the first year to replace our sprinkler system. I don't believe that's a reality, and I think we would be arguing for an extended period of time to define exactly what that means. But I also don't believe that it would cost $1 million to replace the sprinkler system. I don't have personal knowledge of that. I'll ask someone who might have a better understanding of what pumps cost and sprinkler systems cost going forward.
I know, but I'm going to just add one thing.
5 minutes are up.
I know, but I'm going to add one thing.
Well, I've been here 5 minutes.
Because here's the, I think you people need to discuss this more. You need to hone up your end. Mr. Jaworski needs the opportunity to come in and talk. Okay? Look. Then vote it down. Then vote it down.
Well, here's...
Because that's what he was saying to you. Vote me up or down, and then I'll come in and talk to you.
Okay, we have a lot more people who want to come up to the microphone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mike?
Mike Brennan, 1113 Bayshore Avenue, Brigantine, New Jersey. President of Chamber of Commerce. Jack Kelly, Vice President of Chamber of Commerce, is here. We've had discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've been working very hard at this. With all due respect, our position in the chamber, this golf course, we're owners of, Brigantine City's the owner of a golf course. No ifs, ands, buts about it. The considerations that are being made here tonight, we find unviable, both of them. Nothing makes sense. They haven't been thought out enough, they have not enough detail, and they don't solve any problem. You made a decision a number of years ago to buy a golf course, you own a golf course. Great. You're gonna lose $1 million this year? Hey, you're gonna lose it. And he had to fix his pool. He didn't anticipate that. You're gonna lose that money. You gotta think this out and get a viable decision. $13,000 to hire a consultant to go out there and get bids? Hey, are there better consultants out there? This decision cannot be taken lightly. It's not a political football. YouTube's gonna go nuts tonight with you-know-who posting it, okay? It's not a good thing for Brigantine. The decisions to be made here tonight are none. We don't find that Jaworski makes no sense. As a realtor, would I advise a client to sign a lease like that or even enter negotiations with such low numbers? Absolutely not. Would I consider going into a nonprofit blindly and not having the experience in the golf? Absolutely not. That's not a business decision that can be taken lightly, and it's not a political football. It's something that needs to be thought out, detailed spreadsheets, projected revenues, projected costs. What really should be done here, some analysts out here, if we're going to lose $1 million, what is it to go spend $50,000 more to really figure this out? Get some serious experts in here. Somebody could actually bring this in and turn it around and make it happen. That's the cost of doing business. You got into the golf business, you bought a golf course, you got a couple years to pay it off. It's just the way it is. What's our budget here? It's $6 billion something maybe, am I wrong? What's our yearly budget? How much do we spend? How much?
About $29 million.
$29 million, okay? So 1 million is 1/29th of that. It's a shame to lose it. Nobody wants to waste money, but we've already committed to that. Going into a situation where it's not a good deal with the Jaworski thing, it's not a good deal going in another direction as a nonprofit, you're going to have to live with it another year. There's other things. I don't see any marketing dollars. I don't see any capital improvements in any of them. Marketing. What about the management company that's running it now? Should we be looking at that management company?
There's
Could they be doing a better job?
$32,000.
Could
There's
they be doing-
$32,000 of marketing in that proposal.
In which proposal?
Nonprofit.
The nonprofit, Andy, but again, where's it coming from? What are we doing with it? Who's doing it? What I'm saying is, let's take a step back. This is not a panic situation. Gary's emotional. Steve's a smooth speaker. You know, this is not a panic situation here. It is what it is. You bought the course. Go to course of business. If you have to spend more money on experts, spend more money on experts. That's what we do. That's what any business would do. You have to solve a problem. Yes, you identified you have a problem issue. There's no reason that we have to solve it tomorrow. This year, it is what it is. We're coming off of Sandy, the album's doing well, real estate's starting to tweak a little better, the chamber's growing, we're starting to get good summer rentals, we're coming back off a horrific incident after Sandy. Things may look better, and if we approach this in a slow and steady manner, we'll make progress. I'm asking nobody to jump the gun, nobody to get emotional. Let's make smooth business decisions. You all have good points. You all have done a lot of homework. Keep doing it. We're behind you. You're elected officials. Just keep it calm and move it forward. And I don't think there's any decisions that need to be made immediately. The golf course can run another year and work through it, and we'll come up with a better solution. The short-term solution is not always the best solution. And we have very qualified politicians running it, very qualified professionals supporting them. And if the pump breaks, I'm sure John knows how to fix it. So the chamber would ask you,
Threw you right
business
under the
sense.
bus.
Apply business sense. And there's no panic here. No
Duct
matter
tape.
how much pressure is put on you politically, you're not in a panic situation. Everybody believes in you, the business community is behind you, and you've been very business friendly. I'm gonna say that so I get on the internet, business friendly, okay? And just stay the course, and there's no reason to jump into any decision tonight or in the near future. It's just something that you will work it out, because we have all the confidence in the world in you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, sir.
My name's Carl Apter. I live at 402 31st Street South. I'm going to keep my comments very short. I think there's a lot of merit to what Mike said about not making a decision tonight, because there's a lot of problems here. Certainly, if you want to considering Mr. Jaworski, a vote not to reject his proposal is a consideration. It isn't a guarantee. But if you reject his proposal, you have nothing else. But to address something that has been said before, and what Andy said, my experience in coming out to speak to you regarding a business, is I was in a business for over 20 years. We had 200 employees, $20 million a year in sales. I have a little bit of an idea about business. One of the things that I learned, not only from experience, but from coursework, is that don't go into a business you don't know anything about. It's the worst possible thing you can do, to try to run a business where you have no real knowledge of how the business should be run or is run. The other thing I would say is that there is one thing that we know is true. We know that when this golf course was bought, we were told that the taxpayers wouldn't pay a cent. That turned out not to be true. And I don't see why, or I don't hear anything coming from the right side especially, that tells me that that situation is going to improve. I don't see how you now know more than you did 15 years ago, whenever the hell it was it happened, that we're not going to end up spending another $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million because of all kinds of problems and not knowing how to do this business in the first place. That, to me, is such that my way of saying it is, Mr. Mayor, you were wrong the first time. As far as I'm concerned, you're wrong again. Thank you.
Thank you. If in fact, and I'm not sure, I have to go back and look, but my comments probably were that the golf course should not cost the taxpayers money going forward. And I may have said, excuse me. Well, let me finish my sentence.
You can't talk to that guy.
But, you know, once again, if I said that it will not, it was probably a statement I shouldn't have made, because you can't predict what the future will be. And obviously, none of us predicted the longest recession in our nation's history. So given the numbers we had back then, we did pretty well. when you look at the track record for the last 13 years, that the first year that the taxpayers had to subsidize the golf course was last year. In fact, I would put that track record up against a lot of corporate decisions that were made over that time frame. And, once again, this is the only recreational asset that has been paid for by the users. At this point, we are in the last quarter of the debt structure.
Excuse me,
and
Phil.
3/4 of it has been paid for by the users.
Can we just keep listening to the folks coming forward?
Excuse me, Joe.
No.
Excuse me, Joe. I'm running the meeting.
No, but
I
as
am
a
the
point of
chairman.
order, you're
I was asked a
preaching.
question, and actually I was, probably asked more than a question. I was, given a comment that, quite frankly, anyone would respond to. So, with that said, anyone else for public comment? Yes, John.
John Livesey, 203 9th Street North. Two things. Last time I checked, we're an island that's a resort island with a golf course, not a golf course with a resort. And I've heard people say tonight, we shouldn't get in a business we don't know. Well, we're all in the business of running a resort. The golf course just happens to be part of that. And I think we ought to look at that. The Jaworski plan is just about golf. But there's other things that can be done over there if we have to. If the golfing game diminishes to the such that it's not generating income, there's other things we could do there. The third option we have is to keep things the way they are, let it be run the way it's been doing, and maybe give a little bit more money to the budget for marketing and advertising and get behind the island and resort instead of fragmented as golfers and non-golfers. We're all on this island together. To make it work, we need people to come and experience Brigantine as a resort. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
John. Yes, sir.
My name is Richard Ramil, 1101 East Brigantine Avenue.
I'm sorry, could you speak a little louder, sir?
Richard Ramil, 1101 East Brigantine Avenue. I'd like to just get this down to some kind of facts. We're looking at trying to decide which way to go, and I think it's a rush. We're looking at it, and we're going to try to make a decision today. Shouldn't happen today. I've looked at some of these numbers. I don't agree with them. I have a lot of questions about them. You have a lot of questions about Ron Jaworski's numbers. I can understand that. Has this council invited Ron Jaworski to come in and sit behind closed doors and review this?
Yes, we did.
You have?
Yes.
And he's refused to do it?
Yes.
No, wait, hold on. He did not refuse to do it for the 12th time tonight. His people made very clear, they wanted to see something from council to confirm that council wanted to move forward with the deal points expressed in the one-page proposal Andy's talked about many times tonight.
Okay.
That's
Right.
what he's looking for.
Well, what he's looking for is the city of Brigantine to accept the financial terms and then negotiate the contract.
Well,
So,
as long as the contract's not binding, what's the problem? At least that way, we will know. Right now, we don't know. And I agree with the people that said we shouldn't be jumping into this. We shouldn't make a decision today. There's a lot of questions to be
When
answered.
should we, sir? I mean, this has been going on almost 2 years. When are we going to make a decision?
Well, no, it hasn't. As far as Ron Jaworski's been 2 years, this is the first time I've ever seen this proposal for non-for-profit. And oh, by the way,
And we're
I'm
not
sure
making
you're
a
aware.
decision on the nonprofit, we're making a decision on Mr. Jaworski's deal, or we're going to.
Oh, no, then the only opportunity, the only other end is non-for-profit. That's the only other alternative. And I'm sure you know Egg Harbor Township, what it has cost the taxpayers.
Right, because the taxpayers pay the debt over there. That's the problem.
Well, let's
And
keep
my-
the debt, I think we ought to keep the debt out. We keep putting that in there, and that's confusing everything.
well, that's what's costing the taxpayers, the debt. They're not paying for the golf course operation, they're paying for the
But you signed
debt.
up for that.
Pardon
You
me?
signed up when you decided
Yeah,
to
but if we
to
could
have
save
golf
the
course.
money, if we could
No,
save
no,
the
I
money
agree
from the
because you're
taxpayer.
borrowing money, and you keep saying it's a home loan. Well, you pay back home loans.
Right.
Well,
Other
then you're
people
charging-
are gonna
you're
pay
charging the taxpayers for that.
No, we're not.
Yes, you are.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Well, then, what we need to do is put it in a chart and present it at the next meeting, how that operates,
I
so
agree.
that everybody can see it.
There's the accountant right there. He told you how it would operate. You borrow it off there, and the profits from the golf course will pay down the
If it
debt.
makes a profit. And the numbers
Well-
here are static.
Well, we're guaranteed,
They're
we're gonna
static.
lose $1,055,000 right now. We're guaranteed that.
Well,
So
that's
why don't we
because of
give
the
it,
debt service.
and we're not gonna get nothing for the next 2 years
That's a debt
from
service.
Mr. Jaworski.
But you're borrowing
So that
$700,000.
we can do it for the next 2 years. If it doesn't work, we can always put
But
it
you're-
out for
But
RFP
you're
again.
Well, let's reverse that. Let's give it to Ron Jaworski for 5 years. If it doesn't work, we can go for non-for-profit.
No, we don't have that. We don't have that option. He
Mr.
has the option. to
Jaworski has
continue-
that option.
Yeah,
Okay,
we
then
we
good.
lost
Then-
all control.
Then bring him in and talk to him about it.
We have tried.
Right.
So do you understand, the subtle difference of what you've said is one of our concerns. The way it is structured right now is a 5-year lease, and Mr. Jaworski has the right to renew that lease. The city of Brigantine doesn't have the right not to renew it.
But if he's not making money, he won't do it. It's that simple.
Well,
He's a businessman.
let's look at it another way. Let's say that he is perhaps making money, and there are a lot of concerns about the operation. You have hundreds of homes that surround the golf course. There are concerns about a number of issues, maybe the 8,000 taxpayers, 8,000 rounds that are played by taxpayers, maybe they don't have access to the course the way they like to. Maybe some of those issues are out there.
I hear what you're saying. They're maybes and assumptions. Let's find out.
Well, there's guaranteed here.
Well, there-
Guaranteed,
The-
$1,055,000 you're gonna lose.
The other thing I find a little bit ironic, and I'm going to say this, and I know that it's going to generate some heat. There was we're all talking about slow down and don't vote on this proposal. I think there was a definite move in the last month of the last administration to vote on this proposal without any of the details.
But it didn't happen.
Without
didn't happen.
public.
Hold on,
yeah,
that
without
was
public-
100% wrong.
Without
Hold on.
public input.
Don't even try that. That absolutely did not happen.
absolutely
There was
did.
no
It
vote
absolutely did,
taken
Rick.
at all.
There- no,
Absolutely
there was
did. You
no
want to
vote
holler?
taken,
I can
but-
holler.
2 years,
I
2
can
years,
holler
Andy.
again.
You've been
2
dragging
years.
this out.
2 years.
Last
And you haven't done
Friday-
anything in 2 years.
Last Friday,
Excuse
Andy,
me.
for the first time, we see anything on the
Well, here's the
not-for-profit.
thing. What's the problem about putting it off for 2 weeks so we can get all this information? And really try to get this information and talk to
Well,
them.
We've been asking Mr. Jaworski to come. Our attorney, every time we go in an executive session, what's the story with Mr. Jaworski? He will not return a call. Mr. Galvin sends our attorney, no hear from Mr. Jaworski. Will not return our call. Will not return our emails. What do? You move on.